Welcome to Mr. Crimeshow. In this episode, I've put together 13 chilling true crime cases, each filled with disturbing details, mysterious twists, and dark turns. With rain softly falling in the background and a black screen to set the mood, this compilation is perfect for relaxing, unwinding, or falling asleep while listening to true crime. If you value our work, remember to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. The magician who made people vanish, until he did too. In the gritty underworld of 1970s Sydney, few names struck fear into hardened criminals like that of Stuart John Regan. Known as the magician for his ability to make people disappear permanently, Regan would meet his own end on a September evening in 1974, targeted in a hail of bullets that marked the conclusion of one of Australia's most infamous criminal careers. Stuart John Regan was born in 1945 in the quiet country town of Young, New South Wales, into what would become a fractured family. His early years were marked by troubling behavior that would define his entire existence. Even as a child, Regan displayed concerning tendencies, reportedly harming small animals without any trace of empathy. When Regan was just 10 years old, his parents divorced, and his mother took him to Sydney, settling in the rough suburb of Paddington. In this harsh environment, where survival often meant learning to fight, young Regan quickly distinguished himself as unusually aggressive, even among the notorious Paddo boys, who were known throughout Sydney for their toughness. By age 14, Regan's aggression had escalated to attacking strangers on the street, earning him a sentence to the Gosford Boys' Home Reformatory. Rather than rehabilitating him, the harsh treatment he endured there only served to reinforce his already dangerous tendencies. The reformatory became a training ground where Regan's capacity for violence was shaped and hardened. From Paddington, he would eventually gravitate toward King's Cross, Sydney's notorious red light district, where his criminal empire would take root. As Regan entered adulthood, he established himself as a formidable presence in Sydney's underworld through a combination of prostitution rackets, illegal gambling operations, and shady real estate dealings. His methods were ruthlessly simple. Anyone who stood in his way was removed. Between 1971 and 1972, as rival gangs fought over shares of a massive $500,000 Maine Nicholas robbery, Regan's reputation for making people disappear became legendary. Kevin Gore, a member of the Toe Cutters gang, was last seen with Regan during this period and was never found again. Another gang member had vanished days earlier, and police believed both men had been disposed of at sea in a method similar to that employed by the Toe Cutters themselves. Regan's personal life was as complex as his criminal activities. He maintained a relationship with Margaret Yates, who would later become his de facto wife and the mother of 3 of his children. Despite his reputation, those who knew him intimately described a different side of Regan, a man capable of tenderness with his own family while remaining utterly ruthless with anyone who crossed him. His ability to compartmentalize these aspects of his personality made him all the more dangerous and unpredictable. The criminal underworld began taking Regan seriously when people around him started disappearing permanently. His nickname, the Magician, became a grim testament to his ability to make inconvenient individuals vanish without a trace. During his 8-year reign, law enforcement estimates suggest Regan was responsible for between 8 and 12 disappearances, though he was never formally charged. His reputation was so fearsome that even hardened criminals gave him a wide berth. Regan's criminal activities extended far beyond Sydney's borders. In 1973, he became connected to one of Australia's most notorious mass tragedies, the Whiskey Go-Go nightclub fire in Brisbane. On the early morning of March 8, 1973, the popular nightclub was set ablaze, resulting in the loss of 15 innocent lives as smoke filled the venue. The attack was part of an extortion racket involving nightclub fires throughout Brisbane, and Regan's involvement in this operation demonstrated the geographic reach of his criminal influence. The windows of the club had been deliberately sealed, and exit doors were made inoperable, trapping the victims inside as the flames spread. However, it was Regan's alleged involvement in the disappearance of 3-year-old Carlos Scott Huey that would ultimately seal his fate. On May 22, 1974, Regan was entrusted with caring for the child, who was the son of his girlfriend Helen Scott Huey. According to Regan's account to police, he had left the sleeping child in his car parked on Flinders Street in Darlinghurst while he walked to Taylor Square to purchase newspapers at a 24-hour stand around 4 a.m. When he returned, he claimed the child had vanished. The child, of mixed Jamaican heritage, stood approximately 3 feet tall with light brown hair that curled at the ends and a small birthmark on the inside of his left arm. Despite extensive searches, Carlos was never found, and both police and underworld figures suspected Regan had been involved. The disappearance haunted Regan, with many in the criminal community openly accusing him, though he consistently denied any wrongdoing. Regan's psychological profile painted the picture of a classic psychopath who seemed to take satisfaction in causing fear. Former police officers who dealt with him described him as among the most unpredictable criminals they had ever encountered. Detective Roger Rogerson, himself no stranger to Sydney's criminal underworld, would later describe Regan as one of the most uncontrollable criminals from Sydney's gangland heyday, noting that while you could manage a bad man, you couldn't control someone who had descended into chaos. The beginning of the end for Regan came through his feud with SB bookie John "Ratty" Clark. The tension between the two men had been building for months, with Clark being one of the few people brave enough to confront Regan directly about the disappearance of young Carlos. In a moment of fatal boldness, Clark spat in Regan's face and insulted him, words that many had whispered behind Regan's back but few dared say to his face. On August 23, 1974, Clark was having a quiet drink with friends when a bullet from a revolver crashed through a window and struck him. The shockwaves from his demise reverberated throughout Sydney's underworld. Clark's ending was significant because he had friends in high places within the criminal hierarchy, despite also having many enemies. He was not someone who could be touched without serious consequences, and most criminals understood that Regan had essentially signed his own death warrant by taking this action. The underworld operates on its own code of justice, and Regan had violated an unspoken rule by targeting someone under the protection of more powerful criminal figures. The final day of Regan's life began innocuously enough. On September 22, 1974, the 29-year-old gangster spent a pleasant afternoon having a picnic with his young daughter Helen. It was a moment of normalcy in a life otherwise consumed by crime. After the family gathering, Regan made a decision that would prove fatal. He left his home without his protective vest, something he rarely did given the numerous enemies who wanted him gone. He was heading to what he believed was a pre-arranged meeting in Marrickville, a suburb in Sydney's inner southwest. Regan arrived at Chapel Street in Marrickville around 6:50 p.m., appearing relaxed and unarmed, a stark contrast to his usual cautious demeanor. The location was significant in its ordinariness, a quiet residential street near a local primary school where children played and families lived normal lives far removed from the criminal underworld that had consumed Regan's existence. This juxtaposition would make the events that followed all the more shocking to the local community. At approximately 6:50 p.m., the peaceful evening was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Witnesses reported seeing at least 3, possibly 4, shooters emerge from concealment and open fire on Regan. The attack was swift and coordinated, with at least 6 shots fired from 3 different revolvers. The shooters had positioned themselves close to their target, with evidence indicating the weapons were discharged from only a short distance away. This proximity suggested the attack was personal and meant to ensure Regan's demise. When police arrived at the scene, they found Regan collapsed in front of the primary school. He was still alive, but unable to speak. Despite the rapid response of emergency services, Regan passed away, ending one of the most violent criminal careers in Australian history. The coroner's inquiry revealed the methodical nature of the attack. The multiple weapons used, the close-range shooting, and the precision of the operation all pointed to a carefully planned execution. The fact that Regan had been lured to the location unarmed suggested he may have known his attackers, or at least trusted the person who arranged the meeting. The timing of the attack, coming so soon after Clark's demise, strongly suggested this was underworld retribution for that action. The investigation into Regan's elimination proved challenging for law enforcement. The criminal underworld operates on a code of silence, and few were willing to provide information about the identity of the shooters. Multiple theories emerged about who was responsible. Some believed it was direct retaliation for Clark's demise, carried out by associates seeking justice for their fallen comrade. Others suggested Regan's elimination was connected to his attempts to gain control of gambling operations in Sydney's western suburbs and inner-city areas, putting him in conflict with established criminal interests. A particularly intriguing theory that has persisted for decades involves the possibility that corrupt police officer Roger Rogerson was involved in Regan's elimination. Rogerson, who would later gain notoriety for his own criminal activities, had a history of taking out criminals in similar circumstances. In 1981, 7 years after Regan's demise, Rogerson ended the life of substance dealer Warren Lanfranchi in a lane in Chippendale, not far from where Regan met his end. This pattern, combined with Rogerson's intimate knowledge of the underworld and his proven willingness to use force, has led some to speculate that Regan's elimination may have been his first unofficial operation. The aftermath of Regan's demise sent shockwaves through both the criminal underworld and law enforcement. For many in Sydney's crime scene, his elimination marked the end of an era of extreme violence and unpredictability. While Regan had many enemies, his removal also created a power vacuum that would be filled by other ambitious criminals seeking to establish their own territories and operations. For law enforcement, Regan's demise presented a complex challenge. While they were undoubtedly relieved to see such a dangerous individual removed from the streets, the manner of his elimination, a clear execution in broad daylight, represented a troubling escalation in underworld violence. The case remains officially unsolved to this day, though decades of investigation and speculation have provided numerous theories about the identity of the shooters and their motivations. The impact on Regan's family was profound and lasting. Margaret Yates, his de facto wife, was left to raise their 3 young children while dealing with the stigma of being associated with one of Australia's most notorious criminals. For decades, she maintained her silence about their relationship and the man she had known intimately, only recently breaking that silence to share her perspective on the person behind the fearsome reputation. Her accounts provide a rare glimpse into the private life of a man who was simultaneously capable of tenderness with his own family and extreme ruthlessness toward others. The case of young Carlos Scott Huey remained unresolved, adding another layer of tragedy to Regan's legacy. The child was never found, and his disappearance continues to haunt those who knew him. For the child's family, Regan's demise brought no closure, only the grim realization that any answers about what happened to Carlos had likely died with the man most suspected of involvement. Recent years have seen renewed interest in Regan's case, with journalists and investigators using modern technology to examine old evidence and interview surviving witnesses. Voice recordings that Regan made on reel-to-reel tapes before his demise have been enhanced using artificial intelligence technology, allowing his voice to be heard clearly for the first time in decades. These recordings provide unique insights into his personality and criminal operations, offering a chilling first-hand account of his mindset and methods. The Stuart John Regan case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can consume individuals who choose a path of criminality. His 8-year reign left a trail of victims and devastated families, while his own end demonstrated that even the most feared criminals are not immune to the justice of the underworld they inhabit. The multiple agencies and decades of investigation that have been devoted to understanding his crimes and solving his elimination reflect the significant impact one individual can have on an entire criminal ecosystem. For the community of Marrickville and the families who lived near the Chapel Street location where Regan met his end, the events of that September evening in 1974 served as a shocking reminder of how close the criminal underworld could intrude into their peaceful lives. The image of a notorious gangster meeting his end in front of a primary school where children played was a jarring juxtaposition that highlighted the stark contrast between the world of organized crime and ordinary community life. The legacy of Stuart John Regan extends beyond his individual crimes to encompass broader questions about the nature of criminal justice, the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs, and the societal factors that can contribute to the development of violent personalities. His progression from a troubled child who harmed animals to one of Australia's most feared criminals illustrates the potential consequences when early warning signs of behavior are not effectively addressed. Today, more than 5 decades after his elimination, Stuart John Regan remains a subject of fascination for students of criminal behavior and true crime enthusiasts. His case continues to generate new theories, investigations, and media attention, testament to the enduring impact of his brief but notorious career. While justice may never be fully served for all of his alleged crimes, the story of the magician serves as a powerful reminder of the human capacity for both extreme actions and the ultimate consequences that such a path inevitably brings. The families of Regan's victims, including young Carlos Scott Huey, continue to seek answers and closure decades after these tragic events. Their ongoing pain serves as the most important reminder that behind every criminal case are real people whose lives were forever changed. While Stuart John Regan's story is one of criminal notoriety, it is ultimately the stories of those he harmed that deserve our remembrance and respect. The carnival legend, who hid a terrifying secret at home. On a cold November night in 1992, the sound of gunfire echoed through a mobile home in Gibsonton, Florida, ending the life of one of America's most notorious sideshow performers. Grady Franklin Styles Jr., known to thousands as Lobster Boy, lost his life due to the actions of those closest to him, marking the dramatic conclusion to a story filled with decades of fear, control, and desperation. The Styles family had carried the burden of ectrodactyly, a rare genetic condition, for more than a century. Dating back to 1840, this condition caused fingers and toes to fuse together, creating claw-like extremities that gave Grady his stage name. Born on June 26, 1937, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Grady Jr. inherited not only the physical condition from his father, Grady Sr., but also a legacy of performing in traveling carnivals. Grady's condition was particularly severe, affecting both his hands and feet, leaving him unable to walk. While he sometimes used a wheelchair in public, he developed extraordinary upper body strength, using his arms to pull himself across floors with impressive power. This strength, combined with his volatile temperament and heavy drinking, would later make him a threatening presence in his own home. At age 7, Grady was folded into his father's sideshow act, beginning a lifetime in the carnival circuit. The family performed as the Lobster Family, touring the country during carnival season and wintering in Gibsonton, Florida, a unique community that had become home to countless carnival performers since the 1920s. Gibsonton offered special zoning laws that allowed residents to keep show animals and carnival equipment on their property, creating a haven for those who lived outside society's mainstream. The carnival circuit proved profitable for the Styles family, earning between $50,000 and $80,000 per season. Unlike many sideshow acts that involved dangerous stunts or degrading performances, the Lobster family simply had to endure curious stares from paying crowds. For Grady Jr., This world of acceptance among fellow performers contrasted sharply with the turmoil that would define his personal life. As a young man, Grady fell in love with Maria Teresa Herzog, a teenage runaway who had joined the carnival as a staff member. They married and had 4 children together, 2 of whom inherited the family's genetic condition. However, Grady's alcoholism and aggressive tendencies soon transformed their home into a place of fear. Maria Teresa, who later became known as Mary Teresa, endured years of physical and emotional mistreatment. Grady would wake each morning and begin drinking double shots of Seagram's whiskey, his mood growing increasingly bitter with each drink. By afternoon, alcohol had transformed the man his family once knew into someone completely different. Mary Teresa described how Grady would use his claw-like hands to grab and hurt her during heated outbursts. The mistreatment extended beyond his wife to his children. His daughter, Kathy Berry, later testified that Grady had once struck her during her pregnancy, forcing doctors to deliver her baby early by emergency procedure. The children lived in constant fear, never knowing when their father's anger would erupt. In 1978, the family's nightmare reached a devastating peak when Grady's eldest daughter, Donna Miles, fell in love with a young man named Jack Lane. Donna was determined to marry Jack, despite her father's fierce disapproval. Grady had made threats, warning Donna that he would harm Jack if she proceeded with the wedding. On the evening before the planned wedding, Jack arrived at the family home to speak with Grady about the marriage. Jack had hoped to convince Grady to give his blessing, or at least his acceptance of the union. Instead, when Jack arrived, Grady immediately shot him, ending the young man's life. When Donna learned what had happened, Grady looked at her with what witnesses described as a chilling smile and coldly told her, "I told you I would do it." Grady was arrested and put on trial for the crime, but he pleaded not guilty, claiming self-defense. His legal team crafted a strategy around his physical condition and poor health, portraying him as a victim of society's rejection. The defense argued that his lifelong disabilities had led to substance abuse and violent behavior, asking the jury to show sympathy for his circumstances. Grady put on a performance in court, shedding fake tears and expressing false remorse. The jury was swayed by this manipulation, finding Grady guilty of only third-degree manslaughter instead of first-degree homicide. The court determined that no prison facility could adequately care for someone with his medical conditions, including liver disease and emphysema, in addition to his ectrodactyly. Instead of prison time, Grady received 15 years of probation and was allowed to return home. This lenient sentence emboldened Grady rather than reforming him. He had gotten away with taking a life and faced no real consequences for his actions. The violence at home intensified as Grady realized he could act with impunity. During this period, he divorced Mary Teresa and married another woman, only to divorce again. For reasons that remain unclear, Mary Teresa remarried Grady in 1989, returning to the cycle of abuse that had defined their relationship. By 1992, Mary Teresa had endured more than she could bear. At 56 years old, she appeared worn down, nervous, and frightened to those who knew her. Her daughter, Donna Miles, who had become a long-haul truck driver, begged her mother to leave Grady, but Mary Teresa felt trapped. She believed there was nowhere to hide with children who were easily recognizable due to their genetic condition. Grady was well known in the carnival community, and she feared he would find them anywhere they went. The breaking point came during the final weeks of 1992. Mary Teresa confided in her stepson, Harry Glenn Newman Jr., about her desperation. Harry, who was 20 years old and performed as the human blockhead in sideshows, understood the daily terror his mother endured. He had witnessed Grady's anger firsthand and felt compelled to protect her. Harry approached Christopher Wyant, an 18-year-old neighbor who also worked with the carnival. Wyant agreed to help for $1,500, money that Harry and Mary Teresa scraped together from their modest earnings. The plan was simple. Wyant would enter Grady's trailer and ensure he could never hurt anyone again. On the night of November 29, 1992, Grady followed his usual routine. He had spent the day drinking heavily and was watching television in his trailer. Christopher Wyant approached the mobile home, carrying a .32 caliber Colt automatic pistol. Standing outside, Wyant peered through the window and saw Grady sitting alone, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Wyant fired 2 shots through the window, striking Grady. He lost his life instantly, ending decades of fear for his family. The man who had used his physical strength and intimidating presence to control and harm others was finally stopped. The investigation moved quickly as authorities unraveled the conspiracy. Within days, all 3 participants were arrested. Christopher Wyant as the shooter, Harry Glenn Newman Jr. as the organizer, and Mary Teresa Stiles as the one who had requested the action. The case would become one of the most unusual trials in Florida's legal history, involving a battered spouse defense in a murder-for-hire case. Christopher Wyant faced trial first in early 1994. Prosecutors argued that this was murder for money, plain and simple. Assistant State Attorney Ron Hands told the jury that Wyant fired and fired and fired until he held up his end of the bargain. Despite originally being charged with first-degree homicide, the jury found Wyant guilty of second-degree homicide and conspiracy to commit the crime. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Mary Teresa Stiles' trial began in July 1994 and attracted national attention. Her defense attorney, Arnold Levine, made legal history by attempting to use battered spouse syndrome as a defense in a murder-for-hire case. For almost 4 hours, Mary Teresa testified about the years of abuse she had endured. She described how Grady would wake up sweet in the morning, but transform into a completely different person after hours of drinking. Family members took the witness stand to support Mary Teresa's claims. Her daughter, Kathy Berry, testified that Grady was like Satan himself, very cruel and cold-hearted. The courtroom heard detailed accounts of physical violence and psychological terror. However, prosecutors pointed out that on the day of the crime, there were no specific acts of violence by Grady, and the family had even gone Christmas shopping together at Eastlake Square Mound. The judge ruled that battered spouse syndrome could not be used as a complete defense in a premeditated case, dealing a significant blow to the defense strategy. Despite the overwhelming testimony about Grady's abusive behavior, the jury had to focus on whether Mary Teresa was in imminent danger at the time she arranged the crime. On July 27, 1994, the jury found Mary Teresa guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy to commit first-degree homicide. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Harry Glenn Newman Jr. His trial took place in August 1994, and the outcome shocked everyone involved. Despite his mother receiving a reduced charge and the actual shooter being convicted of second-degree homicide, Harry was found guilty of first-degree homicide and conspiracy. The jury apparently viewed him as the mastermind who orchestrated the entire plot. Harry quietly sobbed as the verdict was read, and his family members cried in anguish. He received a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. The disparate sentences highlighted the complex nature of the case. Christopher Wyant, who actually pulled the trigger, received 27 years. Mary Teresa, who had endured decades of mistreatment, got 12 years. Harry, who had tried to protect his mother, received the harshest sentence of all. His half-brother, Grady Stiles III, expressed confusion at the verdict, saying, "It just doesn't seem to make sense." During Mary Teresa's sentencing, she stood before the judge with tears in her eyes and said, "My husband was going to take the lives of my family. I believe that from the bottom of my heart. I'm sorry this happened, but my family is safe now. At least I know they're alive, and I thank God for that." Acting Circuit Judge William Fuente acknowledged that he was genuinely sympathetic to the 56-year-old grandmother and had no doubt she was a battered spouse. The Lobster Boy case raised difficult questions about justice, self-defense, and the limits of legal protection for victims. Mary Teresa's attorney estimated she would serve about 1/3 of her remaining sentence and could be released in as little as 18 months. The case became a landmark in legal discussions about battered spouse syndrome and whether victims of long-term mistreatment have the right to use force when they believe they have no other options. Grady Stiles, Jr. Story became the subject of books, documentaries, and true crime discussions. Author Fred Rosen wrote Lobster Boy, The Bizarre Life and Brutal Death of Grady Stiles, Jr., providing a comprehensive account of both Grady's life and the subsequent trials. The case was featured on television programs exploring the intersection of physical disability, domestic struggles, and criminal justice. The remaining members of the Stiles family continued to live in Gibsonton after the trials, maintaining their privacy and staying away from public attention. Grady's daughter, Kathy, married carnival worker Tyrell Berry, and they had a daughter named Misty, who was born with physical challenges similar to those that had defined the Stiles family for generations. Grady's son, known as Little Grady, had a daughter named Sarah, who was born without the genetic condition. The case exposed the unique world of carnival performers and the tight-knit community of Gibsonton. During the trials, the public gained insight into the lives of sideshow performers, learning about their off-season routines, financial arrangements, and the bonds formed among those who lived outside mainstream society. The testimony revealed both the solidarity and the isolation experienced by families like the Stileses. Grady Stiles, Jr. His life and death remain a disturbing example of how physical differences can be exploited for profit while masking deeper problems of fear and control. His story demonstrates the complex intersection of disability, domestic mistreatment, and the criminal justice system's struggle to protect vulnerable family members. While Grady entertained thousands as Lobster Boy, behind the scenes he used his condition and his strength to dominate those who should have been able to trust him most. The community that had provided acceptance and livelihood for the Stiles family ultimately became the setting for a tragedy that could have been prevented. Mary, Teresa, Harry, and Christopher all paid heavy prices for their decision to take matters into their own hands. Their actions, born from years of fear and desperation, resulted in prison sentences that separated a family already torn apart by decades of turmoil. Grady Stiles, Jr. lost his life on November 29, 1992, at age 55, bringing to an end a story that had captivated and horrified audiences for decades. His death marked not just the end of one man's life, but the conclusion of a cycle of abuse that had trapped multiple generations in fear and uncertainty. While his family finally found freedom from his reign of terror, they paid an enormous price for that liberation, spending years in prison for the choices they felt forced to make. Our hearts go out to all those who suffered in this tragic case. Jack Lane, whose young life was cut short for the crime of falling in love, and the family members who endured years of mistreatment before finding themselves trapped in an impossible situation that led to more tragedy and loss. The sweet grandma everyone trusted until they found what she was hiding. On a warm March morning in 1978, Stuart Taylor collapsed in his North Carolina home, suddenly struck with what doctors initially believed was severe gastroenteritis. Within days, the 56-year-old farmer would lose his life due to the actions of the woman he loved and trusted most, his fiancée, Velma Barfield. What followed was the unraveling of one of the most shocking cases in American criminal history, revealing a grandmother who had systematically taken the lives of those closest to her. Margie Velma Bullard was born on October 29, 1932, in rural South Carolina, the second oldest child and eldest daughter in a family of 9 children. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was a small tobacco and cotton farmer who ruled his household with strict authority. Life in the Bullard home was marked by poverty, overcrowding, and harsh discipline. Velma's mother, Lily, was quiet and did not interfere with her husband's stern treatment of their children. The family's financial struggles forced them to abandon their farm shortly after Velma's birth, moving in with Murphy's parents in Fayetteville. When both grandparents passed away, The large family remained crammed into the small house, creating a tense environment. Velma did not inherit her mother's submissive nature, which resulted in frequent confrontations with her father. School provided some refuge from the chaos at home, and Velma proved to be a bright, attentive student. However, her impoverished appearance made her a target for social rejection by her peers. The shame of being poor led to Velma's first acts of stealing, taking coins from her father and later borrowing money from an elderly neighbor without permission. When caught, her punishment was harsh, temporarily curbing her behavior. By age 10, Velma had learned to navigate her father's temper, developing skills that would serve her throughout her life. At 17, Velma escaped her turbulent home life by eloping with Thomas Burke, settling in the small town of Parkton, North Carolina. The marriage brought her 2 children and periods of genuine happiness. However, their relationship began to deteriorate in 1964 when Thomas was severely injured in a car accident that left him unable to work. The financial stress and Thomas's reliance on substances created new tensions in their household. Velma found herself working at a local textile mill while also dealing with her husband's struggles, which eventually led to his commitment to Dorothea Dix Hospital in Raleigh. During this difficult period, Velma began taking prescription tranquilizers for what she called her peace of mind. This marked the beginning of a substance dependency that would fuel her later crimes. On April 21, 1969, Thomas Burke lost his life under circumstances believed to be accidental when he was found in bed after a fire caused by smoking. While suspicious, the death was ruled accidental, and Velma collected a modest insurance payout. Less than a year after Thomas's death, Velma married Jennings Barfield on August 23, 1970. This second marriage will be tragically short-lived. Jennings, who had been in good health, began experiencing mysterious stomach ailments and illness within months of their wedding. On March 21, 1971, just 6 months after their marriage, Jennings passed away from what appeared to be natural causes. Velma was now a widow twice over, having lost both husbands under unexplained circumstances. Following Jennings's death, Velma's reliance on prescription substances intensified. She was hospitalized 4 times for unsafe substance use, yet maintained her image as a devoutly religious woman who taught Sunday school at the local Pentecostal church. Her dependency created mounting financial pressures, leading her to write fraudulent checks to cover her expenses. The combination of desperation and opportunity would soon prove deadly. In 1974, facing severe financial difficulties, Velma made a decision that would mark the beginning of her known criminal career. Her elderly mother, Lily Bullard, had become dependent on her care. Velma saw an opportunity to solve multiple problems at once. She added a harmful substance to her mother's food, causing Lily to fall gravely ill. As her mother lay unwell, Velma forged her signature on a $1,000 loan application. Lily Bullard lost her life due to the actions of her own daughter, though at the time, no one suspected wrongdoing. Emboldened and desperate to fund her growing substance habit, Velma sought employment as a caregiver for elderly patients. This role provided her with both legitimate income and access to vulnerable individuals. In 1976, she began caring for Dolly Edwards, an elderly relative of a local farmer named Stuart Taylor. Dolly was a kind woman who trusted Velma completely, even allowing her access to her financial accounts. When Velma's theft of money became difficult to conceal, Dolly suddenly became ill and later lost her life due to the actions of the woman she had trusted to care for her. Velma's next victim was John Henry Lee, another elderly man for whom she provided care. Like the others, John Henry began experiencing severe stomach problems after Velma started working for him. In June 1977, John Henry Lee lost his life from what doctors diagnosed only as a severe stomach virus. No autopsy was performed, and once again, Velma had successfully concealed her actions while gaining access to her victims' finances. Later in 1977, Velma began a relationship with Stuart Taylor, a widowed farmer whose relative, Dolly Edwards, she had already caused the death of. Stewart was a kind, hard-working man who genuinely cared for Velma and planned to marry her. Their relationship seemed to offer Velma a chance at stability and happiness, but her substance dependency and resulting financial desperation continued to drive her toward destructive choices. Stewart Taylor began to suspect something was wrong when he noticed discrepancies in his bank account and missing checks. Velma had been forging his signature and taking money to fund her dependency. Fearing that her theft would be discovered, Velma began secretly giving Stewart harmful substances, disguising them as medication for his health. In February 1978, Stewart Taylor began experiencing severe abdominal pain during a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County. His condition rapidly deteriorated, and he was rushed to the hospital where doctors struggled to diagnose his illness. Despite their efforts, Stewart lost his life within days of his hospitalization. The symptoms had perfectly mimicked acute gastroenteritis, just as Velma had planned. However, Stewart Taylor's family was not convinced that their healthy, robust relative could have simply died from stomach problems. They requested a full autopsy, a decision that would finally expose Velma's pattern. The autopsy revealed significant levels of a harmful substance in Stewart's system, clearly indicating interference rather than natural illness. On March 13, 1978, police arrested Velma Barfield for the death of Stewart Taylor. The investigation quickly expanded as authorities received a frantic phone call from Velma's own sister. The caller, clearly distressed, told police that Stewart's death was not an accident and that all of Velma's partners had died under mysterious circumstances. She pleaded with authorities to arrest Velma and put a stop to her destructive pattern. This tip prompted investigators to examine the deaths of everyone close to Velma over the previous decade. On the same day of her arrest, Velma attempted to take her own life through unsafe substance use, but medical intervention saved her. She underwent weeks of psychological evaluation, which found her competent to stand trial. During extensive questioning, the weight of evidence and her deteriorating mental state led Velma to begin confessing. Velma's confessions revealed the true scope of her actions. She admitted to causing the death of her mother, Lily Bullard, in 1974. She confessed to the deaths of Dolly Edwards and John Henry Lee, both elderly people she had been hired to care for. Most significantly, she confessed to causing the death of Stewart Taylor, the man who had loved her and planned to marry her. In each case, she claimed her motive was to cover up her theft of money needed to support her prescription substance addiction. Authorities exhumed the body of Jennings Barfield, her second husband, and found significant traces of harmful substances in his remains. Despite this evidence, Velma denied any involvement in Jennings's death. She also continued to deny responsibility for the death of her first husband, Thomas Burke, though investigators suspected she might have been involved in that case as well. Velma's trial began in Elizabethtown, North Carolina, in November 1978, with the proceedings focusing on the death of Stewart Taylor. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Joe Freeman Britt, presented a methodical case showing how Velma had systematically harmed her victim over time. The evidence included the autopsy results, testimony about Velma's access to toxic materials, and her own confessions to investigators. The defense team attempted to argue that Velma was not mentally capable of understanding the consequences of her actions due to her severe prescription substance addiction. They claimed she was so impaired by Valium and other medications that she did not realize the severity of what she was doing. Her attorneys argued that she had only intended to make her victims ill, giving her time to replace the money she had taken, not to end their lives. Expert psychiatric testimony was presented suggesting that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Dr. Dorothy Otno Lewis, a professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and an authority on violent behavior, testified that she had spoken to Velma's alternate personality, whom she called Billy. According to Dr. Lewis, this alternate personality claimed that Velma had been a victim of past mistreatment and that Billy had retaliated. However, the judge remained unconvinced by this testimony, reportedly stating, "One of them did it. I don't care which one." The prosecution painted a picture of a calculating woman who had methodically taken the lives of those who trusted her most, using their suffering as cover for her theft. They demonstrated how Velma had gained access to her victims' finances and had chosen harmful substances, specifically because their symptoms mimicked natural illness. The evidence showed a pattern of behavior spanning several years and multiple victims. After hearing all the evidence and testimony, the jury deliberated for just 1 hour before finding Velma Barfield guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Stuart Taylor. The jury also found aggravating circumstances and recommended that she be sentenced to death. On December 2, 1978, Judge McKinnon sentenced Velma Barfield to death by lethal injection with an original execution date set for February 9, 1979. During her 6 years on death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, Velma underwent what appeared to be a genuine religious transformation. She became a devout Christian, spending her time ministering to other prisoners and receiving praise from evangelist Billy Graham for her work. Her religious conversion and ministry work became the foundation for appeals seeking to commute her death sentence to life imprisonment. The case took on political dimensions when Governor Jim Hunt, who was challenging incumbent Jesse Helms for his U.S. Senate seat, faced pressure to grant clemency to Barfield. The execution became a contentious issue in the 1984 election, with supporters arguing that Velma's religious transformation and her value as a prison minister warranted sparing her life. However, families of her victims opposed any clemency, arguing that justice demanded her sentence be carried out. Velma's legal team filed numerous appeals over the 6 years she spent on death row, challenging various aspects of her trial and conviction. They raised issues including denial of additional counsel, improper venue, admission of evidence regarding other deaths, prosecutorial misconduct, and the constitutionality of North Carolina's death penalty statutes. Each appeal was ultimately unsuccessful, with courts upholding both her conviction and sentence. As her execution date approached, Velma made a final decision that reflected her stated acceptance of responsibility for her actions. She instructed her attorneys to abandon their final appeal to the United States Supreme Court, stating that she wanted to accept her fate with dignity. This decision effectively sealed her destiny and set the stage for her historic execution. On November 2, 1984, at 2:15 a.m., Velma Barfield became the first woman executed in the United States since 1962 and the first person executed by lethal injection. She was 52 years old. Before her execution, she released a final statement. "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who have been supporting me all these 6 years." In keeping with her modest lifestyle, Velma chose cheese doodles and Coca-Cola as her final meal. She had requested that her organs be used for transplant purposes, but this was not possible. However, her corneas and some tissue were successfully donated, providing a final act of service to others. Velma Barfield was buried in a small, rural North Carolina cemetery near her first husband, Thomas Burke. Her funeral drew approximately 200 mourners, reflecting the complex feelings her case had generated. Despite her crimes, many people had been moved by her apparent religious conversion and her work ministering to fellow prisoners. The impact of Velma Barfield's crimes extended far beyond her immediate victims. The families of Lily Bullard, Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, and Stuart Taylor had to grapple with the betrayal of someone they had trusted completely. These were people who had welcomed Velma into their homes and hearts, only to have their kindness repaid with calculated cruelty. The community struggled to understand how a grandmother and Sunday school teacher could commit such acts against those who loved her most. Her case also raised important questions about the nature of serial offending and the role of substance dependency in destructive behavior. Velma's reliance on prescription substances had clearly been a driving factor in her crimes, yet her methodical approach and ability to maintain her public image suggested a level of calculation that went beyond simple desperation. The case highlighted the particular vulnerability of elderly victims and the trust placed in caregivers. The execution of Velma Barfield marked a significant moment in American criminal justice history, representing both the return of capital punishment for women and the introduction of lethal injection as a method of execution. Her case demonstrated that gender provided no protection from the ultimate penalty when crimes were sufficiently severe and evidence was overwhelming. Perhaps most tragically, Velma Barfield's story represents a profound waste of human potential. Here was a woman who, by all accounts, was capable of genuine love and care, as evidenced by her relationship with her children and her later prison ministry work. Yet her inability to overcome her addictions and her willingness to prioritize her own needs over others led her to become one of America's most notorious serial offenders. The memory of Stuart Taylor, Lily Bullard, Dolly Edwards, and John Henry Lee serves as a reminder of the innocent lives lost to Velma Barfield's deception. These victims trusted her with their care, their homes, and their financial security, never imagining that their kindness would cost them their lives. Their families endured not only the grief of loss, but the additional trauma of discovering that their loved ones had been systematically taken from them by someone they had embraced as family. She walked into a hotel, but what happened next is still a mystery. A young woman's life was cut short in what would become one of Australia's most perplexing unsolved cases, leaving a family to search for answers that have remained elusive for more than 2 decades. 23-year-old Rachelle Childs was a vibrant woman who had built a successful career as a car saleswoman at Camden Holden dealership in New South Wales. She was well regarded in her community, excelling not only in her professional life, but also representing New South Wales in cricket. Those who knew her described her as trusting and caring, someone who brought light to the lives of those around her. Her family included her parents, Anne and Graham Childs, and her younger sister Christy, who would later become a fierce advocate for justice in her sister's case. Rachelle lived in Bargo, a small rural town in New South Wales with a population of just over 3,500 people. Despite its modest size, Bargo had developed an unfortunate reputation as the home of notorious individuals and had connections to bikie gangs and substance activity that operated beneath the surface of small-town life. At the time of Rachelle's disappearance, this undercurrent of criminal activity would become relevant to investigators trying to understand what happened to her. On the evening of Thursday, June 7, 2001, Rachelle followed her usual routine after finishing work at the Camden car dealership around 5:15 p.m. She drove her distinctive 1978 blue Holden Commodore, registered as GV2000, from her workplace back to her home in Bargo, a journey that typically took about 20 to 30 minutes. After arriving home, investigators believe she then traveled a short distance to the Bargo Hotel, where she was planning to meet someone. This meeting would be the last time anyone would see Rachelle alive. What happened next remains one of the most troubling mysteries in the case. Rachelle's car was later discovered abandoned in the parking lot behind the Bargo Hotel, but the circumstances surrounding its placement raised immediate concerns among investigators. The driver's seat was positioned in an unusual way that suggested Rachelle may not have been the last person to drive the vehicle. Additionally, the steering wheel lock was engaged in a manner that was inconsistent with how Rachelle typically secured her car. Police noted that the seat position would have made it difficult for someone of Rachelle's height to reach the pedals, indicating that someone else had likely moved the car after her disappearance. At approximately 2:20 a.m. on Friday, June 8, 2001, a security guard made a shocking discovery while patrolling near Crooked River Road in Geroa, about 60 miles from Rachelle's home. Rachelle's remains were found in a shallow roadside ditch. Investigators determined that an accelerant had been used, suggesting an attempt to remove evidence. The location was remote and would have required local knowledge to access, indicating that the perpetrator was likely familiar with the area. On the morning of June 8, Fiona Shaw, a colleague from Camden Holden, arrived at Rachel's home for a planned meeting, unaware of the tragic discovery that had already been made. Finding the house empty, but with lights and television still on, Shaw became concerned and reported Rachel's absence to their workplace. This detail would later prove significant, as it suggested that Rachel had left her home unexpectedly, without taking time to secure her house as she normally would. The initial police response to Rachel's case was marked by significant challenges and missed opportunities. At the time, there were no established procedures for managing suspicious deaths, and the investigation suffered from poor coordination between local detectives and specialized units. It took several days before the NSW homicide unit was properly involved, during which crucial evidence may have been lost or compromised. The chaotic early response would later be criticized by State Coroner Jane Culver, who noted that the police investigation in the early period, following Ms. Child's death unfortunately, was not able to capture some items of evidence which are no longer available to the current investigating police. The initial autopsy could not determine a definitive cause of death due to the condition of the remains. Rachel was found only partially clothed, suggesting that some of her clothing had been removed or disposed of elsewhere. Without physical evidence from the scene or witnesses from the hotel coming forward, the investigation quickly reached a standstill. Police were left with few leads, as Rachel had no known enemies and was described by all who knew her as someone without conflicts in her personal or professional life. 7 years after Rachel's passing, new information emerged that would transform the investigation and lead to a deeper understanding of what had happened to her. In 2008, a coronial inquest was initiated after concerning statements came to light from Kevin Correll, Rachel's former boss at the Camden dealership. Correll had reportedly told 3 separate people that Rachel's hands had been tampered with due to her alleged connections with bikie gangs. This information was particularly troubling because details about the condition of Rachel's remains had not been made public, raising questions about how Correll could have known such specific details. The revelation prompted authorities to exhume Rachel's remains for a more thorough examination. State Coroner Jane Culver conducted a comprehensive review and made the confirmation that Rachel's hands had indeed been altered before her body was burned. This finding officially classified Rachel's death as a homicide and suggested that her final moments involved deliberate harm. Investigators considered whether this act could be connected to criminal activities or disputes, leading them to explore if Rachel had become entangled in dangerous networks. Coroner Culver's inquest also resulted in extensive recommendations for how police should conduct homicide investigations in the future, emphasizing the need for better cooperation between local detectives and specialized homicide units. Her findings highlighted the shortcomings in the initial investigation and the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining proper protocols in suspicious death cases. Following the inquest, police identified 9 potential suspects in connection with Rachel's case. Over time, 8 of these individuals were ruled out through investigation, leaving focus on one primary suspect. The investigation revealed several persons of interest who had connections to both Rachel and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Kevin Correll emerged as the primary suspect in the case, drawing intense scrutiny from both investigators and the public. As Rachel's boss at Camden Holden, Correll had regular contact with her and was in a position of authority over her professional life. His behavior on the day after Rachel's disappearance raised red flags among her colleagues. Fiona Shaw reported that Correll arrived late to work on June 8 and displayed unusual behavior, showing little concern about Rachel's absence despite her being a valued employee. His knowledge of details about Rachel's remains that had not been made public further intensified suspicion. Police remained skeptical of Coral's alibi for the night of Rachel's disappearance, finding inconsistencies in his account of his whereabouts. During the 2008 inquest, Coral chose not to respond to numerous court inquiries, citing concerns about self-incrimination. This decision to remain silent on key questions only deepened suspicions about his potential involvement. Additional troubling information about Coral emerged through the investigation of journalist Ashley Hansen, who was working on a podcast series about Rachel's case. Hansen's research uncovered testimony from Coral's former wife, who described a marriage marked by emotional and physical mistreatment. The ex-wife revealed that Coral had made specific threats about harming her and hiding her remains, and in one particularly unsettling threat, he had mentioned doing so at Geroa, the same location where Rachel was later discovered. These threats were made years before Rachel's case, suggesting a pattern of disturbing behavior connected to the specific area where the crime occurred. The investigation also revealed that Coral had strong connections to the South Coast area where Rachel's remains were found. He frequently traveled the route that included Crooked River Road, demonstrating familiarity with the remote location that would have been necessary to dispose of evidence. This local knowledge, combined with the other circumstantial evidence, made him a compelling suspect in the eyes of investigators. Another person of interest was Stephen Fessus, who had his own troubling connection to the Geroa area. In 2013, Fessus was charged with the death of his 18-year-old wife, whose remains were discovered in Geroa in 1997, near the same location where Rachel would later be found. Witnesses claimed that Fessus was present at the Bargo Hotel on the night Rachel disappeared, though he maintained that he was at home with his children. The proximity of the two crime scenes and the similar circumstances raised questions about whether there might be a connection between the cases. The investigation also explored potential connections between Rachel and local criminal networks, particularly bikie gangs that operated in the Bargo area. Some community members suggested that Rachel might have had associations with these groups, possibly through her work or social connections. The tampering of her hands, a method sometimes connected to criminal punishment, lent some credence to this theory. However, those who knew Rachel best maintained that she was not involved in any criminal activities, and that such connections were unlikely given her character and lifestyle. The possibility that Rachel met someone she knew and trusted at the Bargo Hotel remained a central focus of the investigation. Friends and family consistently stated that Rachel would not have gotten into a car with a stranger, suggesting that whoever was responsible was someone she felt comfortable with. This theory was supported by the fact that she had gone to the hotel apparently expecting to meet someone, indicating a planned encounter rather than a random crime. As the years passed, Rachel's family never gave up hope for justice. The reward for information leading to a conviction was increased from $100,000 to $200,000, reflecting the continued commitment to solving the case. Anne Childs, Rachel's mother, became a tireless advocate for her daughter, working with investigators and journalists to keep the case in the public eye. The family's pain was compounded by the knowledge that whoever was responsible had never been held accountable for taking Rachel's life. In 2025, nearly 24 years after Rachel's death, a significant development occurred that would impact the case permanently. Kevin Coral, the primary suspect in Rachel's case, was found deceased in a hotel room in Patong, Thailand. At 69 years old, Coral was last seen alive in the pool at the expat hotel and was discovered by a cleaner performing a welfare check. His death occurred just as journalist Ashley Hansen was preparing to release her comprehensive podcast investigation into Rachel's case. Coral's death represented a devastating blow to hopes for justice in Rachel's case. With the primary suspect no longer able to be questioned or prosecuted, the family faced the possibility that they might never receive the answers they had sought for more than 2 decades. The timing of his death, occurring as new attention was being focused on the case through Hansen's investigation, added another layer of frustration for those who had worked tirelessly to solve the mystery. The impact of Rachel's loss on her family cannot be overstated. Anne Childs, now 73, has lived with the pain of not knowing what happened to her daughter for nearly a quarter century. Her husband Graham, who had been equally committed to finding justice for Rachel, passed away in 2021 without ever receiving the answers the family desperately sought. Christy, Rachel's younger sister, has become a fierce advocate for justice, working to keep her sister's case in the public eye and pushing for continued investigation. The case has also had broader implications for how similar investigations are conducted in New South Wales. Coroner Jane Culver's recommendations following the 2008 inquest led to improved protocols for handling suspicious deaths and better coordination between different levels of law enforcement. These changes, while unable to help Rachel, may prevent similar investigative failures in future cases. Despite the setbacks and the passage of time, investigators have maintained that the case remains active and solvable. In 2018, Homicide Squad Commander Detective Superintendent Scott Cook emphasized that the movement of Rachel's car is of particular interest to investigators, and while it was 17 years ago, her car was distinctive, and we believe this could refresh a memory. This statement reflected the ongoing belief that someone in the community possesses information that could be crucial to solving the case. The distinctive nature of Rachel's blue 1978 Holden Commodore has remained a focal point for investigators, who believe that someone may have witnessed its movement on the night she disappeared. The unusual positioning of the driver's seat and steering wheel lock continues to be significant evidence that someone other than Rachel was the last person to operate the vehicle. Recent forensic examinations of Rachel's vehicle have yielded new insights that investigators hope may eventually lead to a breakthrough. The condition of her home, with lights and television left on, continues to support the theory that she left unexpectedly, possibly under duress or believing she would return shortly. Throughout the investigation, one fact has remained constant. Rachel was a beloved daughter and sister whose life was taken far too soon. Her family's description of her as trusting and caring helps explain why she might have felt safe meeting someone at the Bargo Hotel that night. Her success as a car saleswoman and her achievement in representing NSW in cricket demonstrated her drive and talent, making her loss even more tragic. The case has also highlighted the challenges faced by small communities when violent crime occurs. Bargo, despite its problems with criminal elements, was still a place where people knew each other and violent crime was relatively uncommon. Rachel's case shattered that sense of security and left lasting scars on the community. The investigative work of journalist Ashley Hansen and retired Detective Sergeant Damien Loon has brought renewed attention to Rachel's case through their podcast, Dear Rachel. Their collaboration has uncovered new details about the investigation and has kept public attention focused on the need for justice. Hansen's decision to travel to Thailand following Coral's death demonstrates the continued commitment to understanding all aspects of the case. The involvement of Rachel's family in these investigative efforts has been both crucial and emotionally demanding. Their willingness to share their pain and memories has helped keep the case alive in the public consciousness. Anne Child's participation in interviews and documentary projects, despite the obvious emotional toll, reflects her determination to honor her daughter's memory and seek justice. The reward money, now totaling $200,000, remains available for information leading to a conviction in Rachel's case. This substantial sum reflects the serious commitment of authorities to solving the case and may still motivate someone with crucial information to come forward. The Crime Stoppers program continues to accept tips, maintaining multiple channels for people to provide information anonymously. Even with the death of the primary suspect, investigators maintain hope that the case can still be solved. Former Detective Acting Superintendent Mick Sheehy's statement that someone out there knows what happened to Rachel remains as relevant today as it was years ago. The belief that witnesses or people with knowledge exist in the community continues to drive ongoing efforts. The case serves as a reminder of the lasting impact that unsolved crimes have on families and communities. For more than 2 decades, the child's family has lived with unanswered questions about Rachel's final hours. Their strength in continuing to seek justice, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, demonstrates the enduring power of love and determination. Rachel Childs was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her when she lost her life due to the actions of someone who has never been held accountable. Her story serves as both a tragedy and a call to action for anyone who might possess information that could finally bring justice to her case. Though the primary suspect has died, the investigation continues, and the hope for answers remains alive in the hearts of those who loved her. The child's family's courage in sharing their pain serves as an inspiration and a reminder that Rachel's life mattered, and that the search for truth and justice must continue until every possible avenue has been explored. The staircase case, a death so bizarre it still haunts investigators today. On a cold December night in 2001, Kathleen Peterson lost her life due to the actions of someone she trusted most in the world. The 48-year-old telecommunications executive was found lifeless at the bottom of a staircase in her Durham, North Carolina mansion, in a scene that would forever change the lives of everyone who loved her. Kathleen Hunt Atwater Peterson was a brilliant woman who had built a successful career in the technology industry. She worked as a vice president at Nortel Networks, earning a substantial income that helped support the large blended family she shared with her husband, Michael Peterson. Kathleen had been married once before to Fred Atwater, with whom she had a daughter named Caitlin. That first marriage had ended partly due to infidelity issues, making trust particularly important to Kathleen in her second marriage. When Kathleen married novelist Michael Peterson in 1997, she gained not only a husband, but also became a loving stepmother to his children from his previous marriage to Patricia Peterson. The Peterson household was a busy one, filled with the energy of their blended family of 5 children, including Margaret and Martha Ratliff, 2 young women Michael had been raising since their mother Elizabeth Ratliff passed away in Germany in 1985. To those who knew them, Michael and Kathleen appeared to have a strong, loving marriage built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Michael Peterson was a decorated military veteran who had served in Vietnam before becoming a successful novelist and newspaper columnist. He had even run for mayor of Durham several years earlier, establishing himself as a prominent figure in the community. The couple lived in a sprawling 14-room mansion in Durham's prestigious Forest Hills neighborhood, where they hosted gatherings and seemed to embody the American dream. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, the Peterson family was struggling with significant financial pressures. Despite their outward appearance of wealth, Michael and Kathleen had accumulated more than $143,000 in credit card debt spread across 20 different accounts. They had been spending approximately $100,000 more per year than they were earning for 3 consecutive years leading up to Kathleen's death. The couple had been forced to sell liquid assets to manage their mounting debt, and there were concerns about potential layoffs at Kathleen's company. Adding to the family's financial stress were Michael's 2 sons from his first marriage, Clayton and Todd, who were also in severe debt. Michael was so concerned about his son's financial situation that he had reached out to his ex-wife Patricia just 11 days before Kathleen's death, asking her to take out a $30,000 home equity loan to help their children because he couldn't discuss the matter with Kathleen. This email would later become crucial evidence in understanding the family dynamics and pressures they faced. On the evening of December 8, 2001, Michael and Kathleen spent what appeared to be a quiet evening together at their home. According to Michael's account, they had been drinking wine by their backyard pool, enjoying each other's company as they often did. Kathleen had consumed alcohol that evening, and toxicology results would later show her concentration was 0.7%, just under the legal driving limit. She had also taken between 5 and 15 milligrams of Valium. At 2:40 in the morning on December 9, 2001, Michael Peterson made a frantic call to emergency services. His voice trembling with what seemed like panic, he reported that he had just discovered his wife unconscious at the bottom of their staircase. He told the dispatcher that Kathleen must have fallen down 15 to 20, I don't know, stairs, and suggested that her consumption of alcohol and Valium had contributed to the tragic accident. When paramedics and police officers arrived at the Peterson home, they encountered a scene that immediately raised concerns. Investigators noted that there appeared to be more evidence of injury than would typically be expected from a simple fall down the stairs. The nature of the scene suggested to them that some time had passed between when Kathleen was first hurt and when emergency services were called. The medical examination revealed that Kathleen had suffered multiple injuries to her head and neck. The pattern and severity of these injuries were considered inconsistent with a simple fall. The medical examiner determined that Kathleen's passing was due to serious physical trauma, and that the process had unfolded over a period of time after the injuries were sustained. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of what forensic experts called red neurons in Kathleen's brain. These biological markers indicated that she had experienced a lack of oxygen for at least 2 hours, meaning she had been in distress while lying at the bottom of the staircase. This evidence raised the haunting question: where was Michael Peterson during those crucial hours when his wife was struggling for her life? As investigators delved deeper into the Peterson family's private life, they uncovered secrets that would shock the Durham community. A search of Michael's computer revealed more than 2,000 explicit images of men, along with email correspondence with a male escort named Brad. The emails, dating back to August 2001, detailed Michael's plans to meet Brad at the Peterson home. In these messages, Michael had written openly about his desires and past experiences, stating, "I'm very bi, and that's all there is to it." The prosecution would later argue that these secret communications represented a potential trigger for confrontation between Michael and Kathleen. They suggested that Kathleen, who had already experienced infidelity in her first marriage, would not have tolerated discovering her husband's hidden activities. District Attorney Jim Hardin argued that if Kathleen had discovered this secret life, it could have led to the confrontation that cost her her life. Michael Peterson was formally charged with first-degree murder on December 20, 2001. The case would become one of Durham's most high-profile criminal trials, drawing national attention and eventually spawning documentaries and dramatic retellings that continue to fascinate audiences decades later. The trial began in 2003, with prosecutor Jim Hardin presenting a case built on multiple possible motives. The prosecution argued that Michael had been facing severe financial pressure and stood to benefit significantly from Kathleen's death through her $1.4 million life insurance policy. They also suggested that the discovery of Michael's secret communications with men had triggered anger that led to Kathleen's demise. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence suggesting that Michael had attempted to clean up after the incident. Forensic experts testified that they found evidence of attempted cleanup on the stairwell, with traces of fluid discovered in areas that appeared to have been scrubbed. This supported the prosecution's theory that the incident may have unfolded in stages. The prosecution also introduced evidence from 18 years earlier that would prove crucial to their case. In 1985, while the Petersons were living in Germany, Elizabeth Ratliff, a friend of the family and neighbor, had been found deceased at the bottom of a staircase. Michael Peterson had been the last person to see Elizabeth alive, and German authorities had ruled her death accidental, attributing it to a cerebral hemorrhage. However, after Kathleen's death, North Carolina authorities had Elizabeth's remains exhumed and re-examined, arguing that the similarities between the two deaths were too significant to ignore. The defense, led by attorney David Rudolph, maintained that Kathleen's death was a tragic accident. They argued that she had simply fallen down the stairs after consuming alcohol and Valium, and that the prosecution's theories about murder were based on speculation rather than solid evidence. The defense also contended that Kathleen had been aware of and accepting of Michael's attraction to men, challenging the prosecution's motive regarding his private communications. During the emotionally charged trial, Assistant District Attorney Frida Black delivered a closing argument that reflected the attitudes and biases of the time. She questioned whether Kathleen could have truly accepted Michael's private activities, asking the jury, "Do you really believe that Kathleen knew that Mr. Peterson was bisexual? Does that make common sense to you?" She described the materials found on Michael's computer as filth and argued that this was not how soulmates conduct themselves. After deliberating, the jury reached their verdict on October 10, 2003. They found Michael Peterson guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction brought a sense of justice for some, but it would not be the end of the legal saga surrounding Kathleen's death. In the aftermath of the trial, Kathleen's daughter Caitlin, who had initially supported Michael, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against her former stepfather. In 2008, she was awarded $25 million in damages. The civil judgment was intended to ensure that Michael could never profit from his alleged crime, and it meant that any money he might earn from book deals or media appearances would go to Caitlin. However, Michael's legal troubles were far from over. In December 2011, a judge granted him a new trial after it was discovered that Dwayne Deaver, a key prosecution witness and forensic analyst, had provided unreliable testimony during the original trial. Deaver had misrepresented his qualifications and made false statements about blood spatter evidence. Rather than face the uncertainty of a second trial, Michael Peterson made a difficult decision in February 2017. At the age of 73, after spending nearly 8 years in prison, he entered what is known as an Alford plea to the reduced charge of voluntary manslaughter. This unusual legal maneuver allowed him to maintain his innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had sufficient evidence to convict him. The plea deal meant that he was sentenced to time already served and was immediately released from custody. Throughout this entire ordeal, an alternative theory emerged that captured public imagination and added another layer of mystery to the case. Larry Pollard, a Durham attorney and neighbor of the Petersons, proposed what became known as the owl theory. After examining photographs of Kathleen's injuries, Pollard noticed that the pattern resembled the talon marks that might be made by a large owl. Barred owls are common in North Carolina and have been known to swoop at humans when defending their territory. According to this theory, Kathleen may have encountered an aggressive owl while outside her home, possibly while taking out trash or preparing Christmas decorations. The owl could have become entangled in her hair, striking her head repeatedly before she managed to break free and stumble inside. In a state of shock and distress, possibly worsened by the alcohol and medication in her system, she could have fainted and fallen down the stairs. Supporting this theory was the discovery of microscopic feathers and wooden splinters found in Kathleen's hair, evidence that had been overlooked during the original investigation. When the evidence was re-examined in 2008, additional feather fragments were found. Some experts filed affidavits challenging the medical examiner's conclusion that an owl could not have caused such wounds. Despite the intriguing nature of the owl theory, it was never formally presented in court. Defense attorney David Rudolph has stated that the theory came to his attention too late in the trial process to be properly investigated or presented to the jury. Some observers believe that had the jury been presented with this evidence, it might have created reasonable doubt about Michael's guilt. The staircase case has had lasting impacts on all those involved, particularly the children who lost not only Kathleen, but also, in many ways, Michael. 4 of Michael's children continued to support him throughout his legal battles, believing in his innocence and standing by him during his imprisonment. However, Caitlin felt compelled to seek justice for her mother, leading to the painful division within what had once been a close-knit, blended family. Today, Michael Peterson continues to maintain his innocence while living quietly in Durham. In recent interviews, he has expressed frustration with the continued public fascination with the case and the impact it has had on his family. At 80 years old, he reflects on a life forever changed by the events of that December night more than 2 decades ago. The financial consequences of Kathleen's death continue to affect the family. Despite the $25 million civil judgment against him, Michael has claimed to be indigent and unable to pay the full amount owed to Caitlin. Legal proceedings continue as Caitlin's attorneys work to ensure compliance with the wrongful death settlement. The case has also highlighted important issues within the criminal justice system, including the reliability of forensic evidence, the impact of prejudice in high-profile trials, and the role of media coverage in shaping public perception of criminal cases. The discovery of Dwayne Deaver's false testimony led to reforms in how forensic evidence is presented in North Carolina courts. As we remember Kathleen Peterson today, we must focus on the woman she was rather than simply the circumstances of her death. She was a devoted mother who had worked hard to build a successful career in a male-dominated industry. She was a loving stepmother who had opened her heart and home to children who were not biologically hers. She was a woman who deserved to live out her dreams and watch her family grow and thrive. The questions surrounding Kathleen's final moments may never be fully answered, despite years of legal proceedings, expert testimony, and public scrutiny. What remains certain is that a vibrant, accomplished woman's life was cut tragically short, leaving behind a family forever fractured by loss and a community still seeking to understand how such a tragedy could occur. Our hearts go out to Kathleen's family, particularly her daughter Caitlin, who has carried the burden of seeking justice for her mother while grieving the loss of the woman who gave her life and love. May Kathleen Peterson be remembered not for the circumstances of her death, but for the love she shared, the career she built, and the family she cherished during her 48 years of life. The chilling roadside encounter that haunted Australia for decades. Peter Falconio, a 28-year-old backpacker from Yorkshire, England, had no way of knowing that the evening of July 14, 2001, would be his last on Earth. He and his girlfriend, Joanne Lees, were driving their orange Volkswagen Combi van north along the Stewart Highway, one of Australia's most remote and dangerous roads. What happened next would become one of the most notorious crimes in Australian history, leaving behind a heartbroken family, a traumatized survivor, and questions that would haunt investigators for years. Peter Michael Falconio was born in 1972 in Hepworth, West Yorkshire, the third of 4 sons in a close-knit family. His Yorkshire upbringing fostered his love for travel and adventure, and his parents encouraged him to pursue his dreams. In 1996, he enrolled at Brighton University to study, and it was there, at a local nightclub, that he met a young woman named Joanne Lees. The two quickly fell in love and began living together, sharing dreams of seeing the world. Peter was described by those who knew him as someone with an adventurous spirit and a warm personality. His family remembers him as a loving son and brother who brought joy to everyone around him. He had a natural curiosity about different cultures and places, which led him and Joanne to embark on what was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. In 2000, Peter and 27-year-old Joanne set off on an ambitious backpacking journey across Asia. They visited Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Nepal, and Cambodia, immersing themselves in different cultures and creating memories they hoped would last forever. Their families back in England had expressed some concerns about the safety of certain destinations, but they trusted the couple's judgment and adventurous spirit. The final leg of their journey was meant to be Australia, a country they saw as relatively safe compared to some of the places they had already visited. They planned to conclude their travels in Sydney and then explore the vast continent before returning home to England. However, their families became more concerned when they learned about recent incidents in Australia, including the infamous backpacker murders and the Port Arthur massacre. Despite these warnings, Peter and Joanne were determined to complete their adventure. On July 14, 2001, Peter and Joanne found themselves in Alice Springs, a town in the heart of Australia's Red Centre. They had purchased an orange Volkswagen Combi van to travel around the country, and that evening they made a decision that would prove fatal. Despite warnings from local shops and motels about the dangers of traveling the Stewart Highway at night, they decided to drive north toward Darwin. The Stewart Highway stretches for more than 2,800 kilometers through some of the most isolated and unforgiving terrain on Earth. Between Alice Springs and Tennant Creek lies a particularly desolate stretch where services are few and help can be hundreds of kilometers away. It was along this remote section, near the tiny settlement of Barrow Creek, that their journey would come to a terrifying end. At approximately 7:30 p.m., as darkness began to fall across the vast outback, Peter and Joanne were driving north when they noticed another vehicle approaching from behind. It was a four-wheel drive utility vehicle, and the driver was signaling for them to pull over. The man wore a black baseball cap and sported a distinctive Mexican-style mustache. He indicated that there was something wrong with the rear of their van, possibly sparks or engine trouble. Peter, being the trusting and helpful person he was, pulled their combi over to the side of the road. The utility vehicle stopped behind them, and the stranger got out to speak with Peter. Joanne moved into the driver's seat as the man asked her to rev the engine so he could investigate the supposed problem. She could see Peter and the man talking near the back of their van. Moments later, Joanne heard what sounded like a loud bang, which she initially thought was their van backfiring. But something felt wrong. The stranger then approached the driver's side of the van where Joanne was sitting, and her worst fears were realized when she saw he was holding a pistol. Peter was nowhere to be seen. The man threatened Joanne with the weapon and quickly began to restrain her. He tied her wrists behind her back with handmade restraints fashioned from tape and cable ties. He then placed a sack over her head and forced her into his utility vehicle, pushing her between the seats toward the rear. Joanne later testified that during this terrifying ordeal, she caught a glimpse of her attacker and tried to remember every detail of his appearance. What happened next would become the key to Joanne's survival. As her attacker was distracted, possibly while dealing with Peter, she managed to work herself free from the restraints. In a moment of desperate courage, she escaped from the vehicle and ran into the dark, hostile wilderness of the Australian outback. The man searched for her with a flashlight, calling out threats and trying to locate her hiding place. Joanne found herself crouched under bushes in terrain she had never experienced before, with no idea what dangers might be lurking in the darkness. For 5 agonizing hours, she remained hidden, listening for any sign that her attacker had given up the search. Aboriginal tracker Teddy Egan would later confirm that Joanne had indeed hidden in the bush during those terrifying hours. The harsh outback environment, with its extreme temperatures, dangerous wildlife, and vast emptiness, could have easily claimed her life. But Joanne's determination to survive and her will to see justice for Peter kept her going through that endless night. Finally, around midnight, Joanne felt it might be safe enough to venture back toward the highway. When she saw the headlights of an approaching vehicle, she made the brave decision to run out onto the road and flag it down. The vehicle was a truck, and the driver, seeing her distressed state, immediately took her to safety. The investigation that followed would become one of the most intensive and expensive in Australian history. Police launched a massive search operation, treating the case as both a missing person inquiry and a potential homicide. The crime scene near Barrow Creek was meticulously examined, and investigators began the painstaking process of trying to piece together what had happened. As many as 600 individuals were considered persons of interest during the investigation. The case attracted intense media attention, both in Australia and internationally. Joanne found herself at the center of a media storm, with some supporting her account, while others, tragically, began to question her story. The investigation took a significant turn in 2002 when police showed Joanne a series of photographs. Among them was a picture of a man named Bradley John Murdoch, a drifter with a criminal background who had been in the Alice Springs area around the time of the attack. Joanne identified him as the man who had threatened her and presumably harmed Peter. Bradley Murdoch was a 43-year-old man with a history of violence and drug-related offences. Born and raised in Australia, he had spent much of his adult life moving between different towns and engaging in various illegal activities. In the years leading up to the Falconio case, he had been involved in substance smuggling operations along remote highways. The breakthrough in the case came when forensic experts found crucial DNA evidence. Traces of Murdoch's DNA were discovered on the handmade restraints used in the attack on Joanne. Even more significantly, his DNA was found on Joanne's t-shirt, with experts testifying that the DNA was 150 quadrillion times more likely to belong to Murdoch than anyone else. Additional DNA evidence was found on the gear stick of the combi van that Peter and Joanne had been driving. This evidence suggested that after the attack, Murdoch had driven their vehicle into the bush. A stain containing Peter's DNA was also discovered at the scene, providing further proof that he had lost his life due to the actions of his attacker. CCTV footage from a service station in Alice Springs also proved crucial to the case. The footage, timestamped at 12:38 a.m., showed a man who experts believed to be Murdoch. This timing was significant because it placed him in the area at a time consistent with the attack. Both Murdoch's father and a business associate later corroborated that the man in the footage was indeed Murdoch. Murdoch was arrested in 2003 and charged with Peter's death and the assault and attempted abduction of Joanne. The trial began on October 17, 2005, before the Supreme Court of the Northern Territory in Darwin. To accommodate the intense media interest and the complexity of the case, the court building underwent renovations costing $900,000. The trial was presided over by Chief Justice Brian Ross Martin QC. Murdoch pleaded not guilty to all charges, maintaining his innocence throughout the proceedings. The case lasted 8 weeks and was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, as Peter's remains had never been found. During the trial, Joanne Lees took the witness stand to testify about the horrific events of that July night. She described in detail how Murdoch had approached their vehicle, how she had heard what she believed was a gunshot, and how she had been threatened, restrained, and forced into his vehicle. She also recounted her harrowing escape and the 5 hours she spent hiding in the bush. On October 18, 2005, Joanne came face to face with Murdoch in the courtroom and positively identified him as her attacker. This moment was particularly emotional for everyone present, as it represented not just legal testimony, but also a survivor confronting the man who had destroyed her life and taken the person she loved most. The defense team attempted to cast doubt on the DNA evidence, suggesting it could have been the result of accidental contact at a Red Rooster restaurant in Alice Springs, where both Murdoch and the couple had stopped. They argued that the DNA could have been transferred accidentally or even planted by unknown parties. However, the prosecution successfully countered these arguments by presenting the overwhelming scientific evidence. Prosecutor Rex Wild QC methodically presented the Crown's case, demonstrating how all the evidence pointed to Murdoch's guilt. The defense also claimed that eyewitnesses had seen Peter at a petrol station a week after he went missing, but Wild dismissed these claims, noting that the accounts contained conflicting information and had all proven fruitless when investigated. The jury deliberated carefully over all the evidence presented during the trial. On December 13, 2005, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Bradley John Murdoch was convicted of Peter Falconio's death and sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 28 years. He was also found guilty of assault-related charges concerning his attack on Joanne Lees. Only after the sentencing was it revealed that Murdoch had previously been acquitted of serious charges involving a mother and daughter in South Australia. This information had been withheld during the trial to ensure a fair hearing. Murdoch launched several appeals against his conviction, all of which were unsuccessful. He appealed to the Northern Territory Supreme Court in 2006, claiming Joanne's testimony was tainted because she had seen his photograph online before being interviewed by police. This appeal was dismissed in January 2007. The High Court of Australia also refused his application for special leave to appeal in June 2007. Throughout his imprisonment, Murdoch never revealed the location of Peter's remains, despite numerous attempts by authorities to encourage him to do so. In 2016, the Northern Territory introduced no body, no parole legislation, meaning Murdoch would not be eligible for parole unless he disclosed the location of Peter's body. In 2019, Murdoch was diagnosed with a terminal illness and began receiving treatment at Alice Springs Hospital. On June 24, 2025, he was released from prison into palliative care at the same hospital. He passed away on July 15, 2025, at the age of 67, taking the secret of Peter's final resting place with him. The case had a profound impact on both families involved. Peter's family in Yorkshire never gave up hope of finding his remains and bringing him home. They travelled to Australia multiple times during the investigation and trial, showing incredible strength in the face of unimaginable loss. The community in Peter's hometown of Hepworth has never forgotten him, and he remains a beloved figure in the area. For Joanne Lees, the ordeal continued long after that terrible night in 2001. She faced intense media scrutiny and, unfortunately, suspicion from some quarters of the public. The trauma of losing the love of her life in such a violent way, combined with the pressure of being the sole witness to his death, took a tremendous toll on her mental and emotional well-being. The Peter Falconio case became a defining moment in Australian criminal history and highlighted the dangers faced by tourists travelling through remote areas. It inspired the 2005 Australian horror film Wolf Creek, which depicted a serial killer targeting backpackers in the outback. The case also led to increased awareness about safety measures for travellers and improvements in communication systems along remote highways. The story of Peter Falconio serves as a reminder of how quickly life can change and how evil can strike in the most unexpected places. Peter was simply a young man pursuing his dreams of seeing the world with the woman he loved. He had his whole life ahead of him, filled with possibilities and adventures yet to be experienced. The loss of Peter Falconio represents not just the end of one young life, but the destruction of all the contributions he might have made to the world. His family and friends continue to honor his memory, ensuring that he will never be forgotten despite the tragic circumstances of his passing. While his remains may never be found, Peter's spirit lives on in the hearts of those who loved him and in the ongoing fight for justice and safety for all travelers. The freezer in their garage held a terrifying secret. A young woman had spent the afternoon applying makeup and styling hair at Raffield's School of Beauty in Boardman, Ohio, working toward her cosmetology license. Shannon Elizabeth Grave returned home to the apartment she shared on Mahoning Avenue in Youngstown on February 24, 2017. She had no idea this would be the last ordinary day of her life. Shannon was born on November 4, 1988, to Christine Grave and Ronnie DePaul in Youngstown, Ohio. Her half-sister Debbie DePaul remembered Shannon as a girl who was funny, quick-witted, energetic, and a little sassy during her younger years. Growing up, Shannon became fiercely independent, though this spirit sometimes led to rebellious choices. She dropped out of high school and began working at a local bar to support herself financially while dreaming of a career in cosmetology. Despite the challenges of working long shifts waiting tables and returning for just a few hours of sleep before attending beauty school all day, Shannon remained determined to build a better life for herself. Her friends described Shannon as naturally gifted with makeup and hair styling. These talents, combined with her hard work and dedication, finally paid off when she received her cosmetology license in 2016 through Raphael's School of Beauty. Shannon was excited about starting her new career in the beauty industry and had dreams of eventually owning her own home. Those who knew her said she had a free spirit and maintained friendships with many people throughout the community. Her friend Katie Morar would later explain that it wasn't uncommon for Shannon to just kinda like poof and disappear for periods of time, which was simply Shannon's nature. Shannon's family life was complicated by an unstable relationship that would ultimately prove tragic. In April 2016, she met Archero Navoa, and by September of that year, they had moved in together at the Mahoning Avenue apartment. From the beginning, their relationship was described as tumultuous and volatile. Friends and family members witnessed concerning signs, noting that Archero was allegedly aggressive towards Shannon during their time together. The couple's relationship temporarily ended in December 2016 when Archero moved in with another woman named Katrina Layton. However, after just 1 week, he returned to Shannon and their troubled relationship resumed. Shannon's world became increasingly dangerous as the volatile relationship with Archero continued into early 2017. On February 24, 2017, that danger reached a tragic conclusion when Archero took Shannon's life in the bathroom of their shared home. Court records reveal that he used a hammer in the act. Afterward, Archero embarked on what prosecutors would later describe as an extended and disturbing attempt to cover up what he had done, efforts that would span several months and multiple locations. Immediately following Shannon's passing, Archero began an elaborate cover-up. He cut her hair and carefully wrapped her remains in garbage bags before placing them in the trunk of her own car. Archero then contacted Katrina Layton, who had been his brief romantic interest just months earlier. Together, they drove Shannon's remains to Katrina's apartment on Shields Road, where Archero's friend Andrew Herman was waiting. In the garage of Katrina's apartment, further attempts were made to conceal Shannon's remains by separating them into 2 storage containers. Between March 1 and March 11, 2017, the containers were transporting back to the Mahoning Avenue apartment where Shannon had lived. There, they were placed in a freezer while Archero continued his efforts to eliminate any trace of what had happened. On March 1, Archero contacted a friend named Steve who lived on Sherwood Avenue in Youngstown, asking if he could hold a bonfire at Steve's property. That evening, Archero and Katrina arrived with bags and containers filled with Shannon's personal belongings. The bonfire burned throughout the night as Archero and Katrina systematically destroyed Shannon's clothing, papers, and even her hair. Among the items thrown into the flames was a bracelet with Shannon's name inscribed on it. The fire grew so large that it attracted the attention of the local fire department, who arrived to investigate the blaze. The following day, concerned residents of the Sherwood Avenue home went to examine the fire pit area. They had noticed Archero and Katrina removing items from bags and containers to feed the fire, which had worried them. During their search of the ashes, they discovered the partially burned bracelet bearing Shannon's name and decided to preserve all the ashes in a laundry basket, which would later become crucial evidence. Meanwhile, Archero and Katrina made a disturbing purchase at a local Walmart. Using the alias Chicken Man, they ordered 12 gallons of sulfuric acid for in-store pickup. When the Walmart employee insisted on seeing identification, Katrina showed her ID and used her credit card to complete the transaction. The couple then used this acid in an attempt to dissolve parts of Shannon's remains, though they were only partially successful. What was left was stored in the freezer alongside the containers. In the weeks following Shannon's death, Katrina moved into the Mahoning Avenue apartment with Archero, essentially stepping into Shannon's life. She began using Shannon's phone and credit cards, maintaining the illusion that Shannon was still alive. This deception continued for months while Shannon's family grew increasingly concerned about her absence. The first real sign that something was seriously wrong came when Shannon failed to attend her half-sister Debbie's birthday party in March 2017. While Shannon was known to disappear for periods due to her free-spirited nature, Missing such an important family event was highly unusual for her. As the weeks passed and no one heard from Shannon, her family's concern deepened. Shannon's father decided to contact Archero directly to ask about her whereabouts. Archero told him the same story he would later tell police. Shannon had broken up with him and moved to Cleveland to be with another man. When attempts to reach Shannon by phone proved unsuccessful, the family realized that something was truly wrong. Her phone calls went unanswered, and eventually they discovered that her phone number had been assigned to someone else. On June 22, 2017, Debbie DePaul officially reported her sister missing to the Youngstown Police Department. By this time, Shannon had not been heard from in nearly 4 months. The investigation into Shannon's disappearance presented significant challenges for law enforcement. Detective Mike Lambert and Lieutenant Detective Doug Bobovnik with the Youngstown Police Department began by examining Shannon's personal life and relationships. They requested Shannon's phone records and started interviewing people who knew her. When police spoke with Archero, he maintained his story about Shannon leaving him for another man in Cleveland. However, investigators found his account suspicious because they could find no evidence of this supposed new boyfriend. Additionally, since they weren't sure exactly when Shannon had disappeared, they couldn't verify whether Archero had an alibi. Police also investigated Shannon's previous boyfriend, John, who had a roofing business and a criminal history involving drug dealing. The timing was suspicious because John had been released from prison shortly before Shannon was believed to have disappeared. Shannon and John had broken up while he was incarcerated, which had upset him according to those who knew about the situation. Detective Lambert noted that John had both motive and opportunity. However, when interviewed, John told police he hadn't seen Shannon since February and that during their last conversation, she had mentioned giving Archero another chance at their relationship. He also admitted to still having romantic feelings for Shannon. When Shannon's phone records finally arrived, they provided little help to investigators. The records showed that near the end of February 2017, Shannon had traveled to her job as usual, but then all activity stopped. Her phone had been turned off, and the number was later assigned to someone else. Around the same time, all activity on Shannon's credit cards also ceased. Lieutenant Detective Bobovnik described the situation as a dead end. The breakthrough in the case came unexpectedly on July 30, 2017, when Ken Eschenbaugh made a shocking 911 call from his home in Campbell, Ohio. Ken and his wife Jill had discovered human remains wrapped in black garbage bags inside a freezer in their home. When police arrived and questioned the couple, they learned that the freezer belonged to a friend who had claimed his power was out and needed a place to store it. The friend had brought the freezer to their home approximately a week earlier. Jill Eschenbaugh explained to police that she had been looking for ground beef to make meatballs when she noticed the freezer was secured with a padlock. Using a screwdriver, she managed to open the lock, but inside she found piles of black bags and a bucket, all accompanied by a terrible smell. Her husband Ken investigated further and opened one of the bags, revealing something that looked human. The discovery was so shocking that prosecutor Dan Casares would later say, "I don't know if words can describe it. It's a horrific case." When police examined the remains more closely, they found that one of the feet bore a tattoo of a scorpion. This detail was crucial because Shannon, who was born under the astrological sign Scorpio, had exactly such a tattoo on her foot. The identification was confirmed through fingerprint analysis, since the coroner was unable to determine the cause of death due to the missing head. Police now knew they had found Shannon, but they still needed to determine how her remains had ended up in the Eschenbaugh's freezer. The investigation quickly focused on the person who had brought the freezer to the Eschenbaugh's home. They had been told his name was Anthony Gonzalez, but police soon discovered this was an alias for Archero Navoa. This revelation immediately connected Archero to the freezer containing Shannon's remains. Further investigation revealed that Archero had entered into a relationship with Katrina Layton, who had moved into the Mahoning Avenue apartment just 2 weeks after Shannon was last seen alive. Police arrested both Archero and Katrina and conducted a thorough search of the Mahoning Avenue apartment. The search revealed disturbing evidence including a meat cleaver, traces of damage on the walls, and an owner's manual for the deep freezer where Shannon's remains had been discovered. During questioning, both Archero and Katrina denied any involvement in Shannon's disappearance and claimed they didn't know where she was. However, their denials became meaningless when police found a key among Archero's belongings that fit the padlock on the freezer. Detective Lambert noted, there now was a direct connection between him and the freezer. Shannon's former boyfriend, John, played an unexpected but crucial role in helping police build their case. Despite being an initial suspect, John had been speaking with people in Shannon's circle and learned valuable information. He discovered that a friend named Steve had hosted the bonfire that Archero had attended, where Archero had burned what appeared to be personal items. When police visited Steve's property, they were able to recover important evidence from the fire pit, including Shannon's partially burned bracelet. Steve provided police with additional details about the bonfire. He explained that Archero had told everyone he was burning Shannon's clothes because she had cheated on him. Steve also revealed that Andrew Herman had accompanied Archero to the bonfire, and both men had participated in destroying Shannon's belongings. This information led police to expand their investigation to include Herman and eventually others who had participated in the cover-up. The investigation took another significant turn when police spoke with a woman named Jamie, who was involved in a relationship with both Andrew Herman and his wife. Jamie provided police with crucial testimony, revealing that it was both Archero and Katrina who had taken Shannon's life, while Herman had helped conceal the remains. According to Jamie, Katrina's actions were motivated by jealousy over Shannon's relationship with Archero. It became clear that an entire group of friends had worked together to cover up Shannon's death. As the investigation progressed, numerous suspects were called to testify before a grand jury, where the full scope of the conspiracy finally emerged. Andrew Herman's testimony revealed disturbing details about what had happened. He claimed that Archero had called him to come to the house one day, and when he arrived, he discovered Shannon's remains. According to Herman's account, Archero told him that Katrina had been the one to fatally strike Shannon with a hammer. Herman also stated that it was Archero's idea to further conceal her remains. The testimony revealed the calculated nature of the cover-up conspiracy. The group had initially decided to use sulfuric acid to completely dissolve Shannon's remains. However, they discovered they didn't have enough acid to eliminate everything, which led them to purchase the deep freezer to store the rest. This methodical approach to destroying evidence demonstrated the premeditated nature of their actions following Shannon's death. Meanwhile, as police built their case, the situation became more desperate for Archero and Katrina. Knowing that law enforcement was closing in on them, they purchased a second freezer at a Walmart store on Belmont Avenue. Katrina also rented an apartment on Ravenwood Avenue as part of their plan to relocate Shannon's remains. However, when police raided their Mahoning Avenue residence, they were forced to change their plans. In desperation, Archero contacted his friend Ken Eschenbaugh, claiming he needed a place to store his meat-filled freezer because his electricity had been shut off. Ken agreed to help his friend, not knowing the truth about what the freezer actually contained. During their investigation, police also listened to Archero's phone calls from jail, which led to the discovery of several old cell phones that had been discarded along the curb outside the Mahoning Avenue apartment. Analysis of these phones provided additional evidence that implicated both Andrew Herman and his wife, Michelle Eichlenfeld, in the conspiracy. The legal proceedings began with Archero facing the most serious charges. On August 30, 2017, he was indicted on multiple counts including aggravated homicide, obstruction of justice, grand theft auto, evidence tampering, abuse of a corpse, theft of benefits, illegal substance trafficking involving marijuana, and possession of criminal tools. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, Archero entered into plea negotiations with prosecutors. In May 2019, Archero pleaded guilty to the charges related to Shannon's death and the subsequent cover-up. He was initially sentenced to 48 years to life in prison. However, Archero filed an appeal in September 2021, and in February 2022, the court upheld his conviction but reduced his sentence to 43 years to life. Prosecutor Dan Casares from the Ohio Attorney General's office, who had called this case one of the most brutal cases in memory, successfully secured this conviction. Katrina Layton faced charges of tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and abuse of a corpse. Initially, she had negotiated a deal that would have resulted in no jail time and only probation. However, this agreement was revoked when authorities discovered she had been maintaining contact with the incarcerated Archero. On January 28, 2020, Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost announced that Katrina had been sentenced to 18 years in prison. Attorney General Yost stated, "Abuse of a corpse is described as an offense that outrages reasonable community sensibilities, and her grotesque actions fit the bill." Andrew Herman pleaded guilty to 4 counts of tampering with evidence, 1 count of abuse of a corpse, and 1 count of engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. On March 11, 2020, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Attorney General Yost noted that this prison sentence is the final chapter of one of the most brutal cases in memory, and praised Special Prosecutor Dan Casares for his work in delivering justice and closure for the victim's family. Michelle Eichenfeld, Herman's wife, was charged with lying to a grand jury and intimidating a witness. She received a sentence of 2 years in prison, 6 months in a halfway house, and 5 years of community supervision. Michelle served 23 months in Mahoning County Jail and 4 months in a halfway house before being released. Today, the consequences of this terrible conspiracy continue to unfold. Archero, now 37 years old, remains incarcerated at the Mansfield Correctional Institution and is not expected to be eligible for parole until 2065. Katrina, now 40, is serving her sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women and will become eligible for parole in 2036. Andrew Herman continues to serve his 12-year sentence. On October 6, 2017, Shannon's family held a memorial evening to remember her life and seek some measure of closure. The event was organized by her sister Debbie DePaul, who had been the one to report Shannon missing. For Shannon's family, the discovery of what had happened to their loved one was devastating beyond words. They had hoped for months that Shannon would simply return home, as she had done in the past during her free-spirited disappearances. Shannon Grave was a young woman who had worked hard to overcome early challenges and build a promising future for herself. She had achieved her dream of earning her cosmetology license and was excited about starting her career in the beauty industry. Her life was taken from her at just 28 years old by someone she had trusted and shared her home with. The elaborate conspiracy to hide her death involved multiple people who showed shocking disregard for her dignity and her family's suffering. Though justice has been served through the courts, nothing can restore the bright future that Shannon had been working so hard to create for herself. Her memory deserves to be honored, and her family's courage in seeking justice ensures that those responsible will face the consequences of their actions for decades to come. They left a basketball game and walked straight into one of the strangest mysteries ever. On the night of February 24, 1978, 5 young men gathered to watch a basketball game, never imagining this ordinary evening would become one of California's most haunting mysteries. Gary Mathias, Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jackie Hewitt had formed an unbreakable bond through their shared experiences at Gateway Projects, a non-profit organization that provided support and employment opportunities for adults with disabilities. What happened next would leave their families searching for answers that remain elusive nearly 5 decades later. Gary Dale Mathias was 25 years old, standing 5 feet 10 inches tall with brown hair and hazel eyes. He had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but remained stable on his medication. Gary had served in the army before being discharged for medical reasons, and despite his challenges, he had recently joined the close-knit group of friends through Gateway projects just months before their disappearance. His younger sister Tammy would later describe Gateway projects as a place that disabled kids could go to for training, learn a job trade, and help them to possibly live on their own. Theodore Ted Weiher, at 32, was known as a gentle giant despite his large physical stature. He worked steadily as a janitor at Yuba Gardens Middle School and later at Pacific Gas and Electric, packaging and repairing cables. Ted faced intellectual challenges that required some supervision, but his kind heart and social nature made him beloved among his friends. He was particularly close to Jackie Hewitt, sharing a protective friendship that meant everything to both men. Despite having a poor sense of direction and fearing darkness, Ted would regularly walk 7 miles to visit his friend Bill Sterling, demonstrating the depth of his loyalty. Jack Doc Madruga, 30 years old and of Portuguese descent, earned his nickname from his habit of quoting Bugs Bunny. He was an introverted man who valued privacy and independence above all else. Jack had served 2 years in the army as a truck driver in Germany before his 1968 discharge, and this military background contributed to his self-reliance and sense of responsibility. Though never formally diagnosed with an intellectual disability despite having below-average IQ scores, Jack had graduated high school and managed his finances carefully while living with his mother Melba. His most prized possession was his 1969 Mercury Montego, which he rarely allowed others to drive. Jack worked as a busboy at Sunsuit Growers alongside Bill Sterling through the Gateway Projects program. William Bill Sterling was 29 years old and deeply religious, regularly volunteering at local hospitals to read Bible passages to patients. He had been diagnosed with an intellectual disability and possibly fell on the autism spectrum. Between the ages of 8 and 19, Bill had spent time in mental health institutions, but he had found stability and purpose through his work and friendships. His gentle, empathetic nature made him a natural caregiver, and he was an active member of a bowling team called the Pin Pickers. His closest friendship was with Jack Madruga, making their shared fate even more tragic. Jackie Charles Hewitt, at 24, was the youngest and most reserved member of the group. His parents described him as having been handicapped from birth, and he suffered from asthma that sometimes limited his activities. Though reportedly the most intellectually challenged of the 5, his family believed he functioned well within familiar environments where he felt safe and supported. Jackie's quiet nature masked a deep capacity for friendship, particularly with Ted Weiher, who looked after him like a protective older brother. Each of these men brought unique qualities to their friendship, creating a support system that helped them navigate a world that sometimes treated them unkindly. The Gateway Projects program had become central to their lives, providing not just employment, but a sense of community and belonging. However, this organization had faced its own troubles in recent years, with arson attacks on several occasions and the tragic loss of an executive director who lost his life under violent circumstances. The program had been established in 1970 by Robert Sutherland, who was partially blind and understood the challenges faced by people with disabilities in finding meaningful work. On that fateful Friday evening, February 24, 1978, the 5 friends piled into Jack's beloved Mercury Montego and drove 50 miles to Chico to watch a college basketball game between UC Davis and Chico State. They were excited about the game, but they also had something even more important planned for the next day. A Special Olympics basketball tournament they had been preparing for with great enthusiasm. They had even laid out their uniforms the night before, demonstrating how much the event meant to them. After the basketball game ended, the group made one final stop at a local store around 10 p.m. where they purchased simple snacks, chocolate, pies, and chips. This mundane purchase would become their last confirmed sighting by witnesses who knew them. Store employees later remembered the transaction, noting nothing unusual about the men's behavior or demeanor. They seemed in good spirits, chatting among themselves as they prepared for the drive home to Yuba County. But the 5 friends never made it home that night. The next morning, when they failed to appear for their Special Olympics tournament, their families immediately knew something was terribly wrong. These men were creatures of habit who took their commitments seriously, especially something as important to them as the Special Olympics. Their absence sent waves of panic through their families and the Gateway Project's community. A massive search effort began immediately, involving multiple law enforcement agencies and hundreds of volunteers. For days, searchers combed the area between Chico and Yuba County, following the most logical routes the men would have taken to return home. But on February 28, 1978, 4 days after the disappearance, Jack's Mercury Montego was discovered in the most unlikely place imaginable. The car was found abandoned on a remote mountain dirt road deep in the Plumas National Forest, approximately 70 miles from where it should have been. The location was so far off any reasonable route home that investigators struggled to understand how or why the men had ended up there. The unpaved road was treacherous even in good weather, and in February it would have been covered with snow and ice. Even more puzzling, the car was in perfect working order and could easily have been pushed out of the shallow snowpack where it sat. The keys were missing, but there were no signs of struggle or foul play around the vehicle. Inside the car, investigators found the men's personal belongings undisturbed. Their wallets, identification, and other items remained exactly where they would normally be kept. There was no indication of panic, violence, or any reason why 5 men would voluntarily abandon a perfectly functional vehicle in such a remote location during winter. The discovery raised more questions than it answered, launching what would become one of California's most perplexing missing persons investigations. As winter turned to spring and the mountain snow began to melt, search efforts intensified. Investigators and volunteers continued to scour the vast wilderness area, hoping to find any trace of the 5 missing men. The families never gave up hope, organizing their own search parties and keeping the case in the public eye through media appeals. But as weeks turned to months, the prospects of finding the men alive grew increasingly dim. Then, in June 1978, a group of motorcyclists made a discovery that would provide some answers while deepening the mystery exponentially. Nearly 20 miles north of where the abandoned Mercury had been found, they came across a Forest Service trailer at the Daniel Zink campground. What they found inside would haunt investigators for decades to come. Ted Wyher's remains were discovered inside the trailer, wrapped in sheets, as though someone had tried to care for him in his final moments. Evidence suggested he had survived for an extended period of time after the group's disappearance. Investigators noted that his beard growth indicated he had lived for 8 to 13 weeks. He had experienced significant weight loss during this time, and his shoes were missing. The official findings concluded that Ted had passed away due to a combination of lack of food and cold exposure. But this finding only deepened the mystery, because the trailer and surrounding area contained everything needed for survival. There was a year's supply of sea rations stored in a nearby shed, enough food to keep all 5 men alive for months. 36 of the military meals had been consumed, but the vast majority remained untouched. The trailer also contained freeze-dried meals, heavy forestry clothing, matches, books that could serve as kindling, and a propane tank that could provide both heat and cooking fuel. Most puzzling of all, there were several heating stoves and heating cans for the sea rations that had never been used. The evidence suggested that someone else had been with Ted in the trailer, as the way the sheets were arranged around him indicated he could not have done it himself. On the table beside the bed were Ted's personal effects, his wallet with cash still inside, a nickel ring engraved with Ted, and his gold necklace. Also on the table was a gold watch without its crystal, which none of the families recognized as belonging to any of the 5 men. Most significantly, investigators found Gary Mathias's tennis shoes in the trailer, suggesting he had also survived beyond the initial disappearance and had been present during at least part of Ted's ordeal. Outside the trailer, investigators made additional discoveries that painted a picture of desperation and confusion. Empty C-ration cans were scattered around the area, and one had been opened with what appeared to be a standard can opener rather than the military P-38 opener that would normally be used. This was particularly strange because both Jack and Gary had military experience and would have known how to use the proper opener, and Jackie's father had taught him to use a P-38 on camping trips. A tool shed with a lock had been broken into using what appeared to be a file, while another shed containing a generator remained untouched. About a quarter-mile away, searchers found 3 wool Forest Service blankets and a flashlight lying by the roadside. In the weeks following the trailer discovery, searchers found the remains of the other 3 men scattered throughout the forest. Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jackie Hewitt had all succumbed to the elements. The locations where they were found suggested they had become separated and did not survive the harsh wilderness conditions. Each discovery brought fresh grief to their families while adding new pieces to an increasingly complex puzzle. Gary Mathias, however, was never found. Despite extensive searches covering hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain, no trace of him has ever been discovered. He remains classified as a missing person, though investigators presume he perished in the wilderness decades ago. At the time of his disappearance, Gary was 25 years old. Today, he would be 72 if somehow still alive. The discovery of his shoes in the trailer where Ted died suggests he survived at least part of the ordeal, but what happened to him afterward remains unknown. The mystery deepened further when a witness came forward with an unusual account of that night. Joseph Scones, a 55-year-old man with a history of alcohol problems and previous legal troubles, claimed he had been on the same mountain road when he suffered a health emergency while trying to free his stuck Volkswagen Beetle from the snow. According to Scones, he had seen 2 sets of headlights approaching 1 car and 1 pickup truck. He claimed that when he called out for help, the lights went out and voices he had heard fell silent. In some versions of his account, Scones described seeing a group that included a woman carrying what appeared to be a baby. However, his story changed over multiple tellings, and details varied significantly between accounts. No physical evidence ever corroborated his claims, and no other witnesses placed unknown third parties on the mountain road that night. The investigation revealed troubling questions about how thoroughly the case was initially handled. According to some family members, law enforcement agencies may have mishandled crucial evidence and declined offers of assistance from federal investigators. For nearly 5 decades, significant details were kept from Gary Mathias's mother, who was led to believe her son might have been responsible for his friend's fate. It wasn't until October 2023, when digitized case files were finally released following Freedom of Information Act requests, that the full scope of the evidence became available to the families. The release of these files revealed that all 4 men who were found had died from starvation and hypothermia, not violence. The families of the Yuba County 5 have never received satisfactory answers about what happened to their loved ones. The disappearance created profound ripples throughout their community, leaving parents, siblings, and friends to grapple with an incomprehensible loss. The men's involvement with gateway projects had made them part of a tight-knit community where everyone looked out for each other. Their disappearance sent shockwaves through this vulnerable population and highlighted the particular risks faced by adults with disabilities. Multiple theories have emerged over the years to explain what happened that night, but none fully account for all the evidence. Some investigators believe the men may have encountered hostile individuals who forced them off their intended route. The witness account of Joseph Scones, despite its inconsistencies, remains the only potential evidence of third-party involvement. Others theorize that Gary Mathias may have experienced a mental health crisis that led the group to make a series of increasingly poor decisions. His schizophrenia, even when controlled by medication, could have been triggered by stress or other factors. Another possibility is that the men simply took a wrong turn in the dark and became lost. then made a fatal decision to abandon their vehicle rather than wait for rescue. However, this theory struggles to explain why they would leave a perfectly functional car, or why they traveled so far from any reasonable route home. The discovery that Ted lived for months in a trailer stocked with survival supplies, while apparently making no effort to signal for help or seek rescue, adds another layer of complexity to any explanation. The case has been compared to the famous Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia, where 9 hikers died under mysterious circumstances in 1959, earning the Yuba County 5 the nickname America's Dyatlov Pass. Like that case, the Yuba County 5 mystery involves a group of friends who met tragic ends under circumstances that seem to defy rational explanation. Both cases feature evidence of survival for extended periods under harsh conditions, puzzling decisions by the victims, and a complete absence of clear answers about what initiated the deadly sequence of events. What makes the Yuba County 5 case particularly heartbreaking is the vulnerability of the victims. These were not experienced outdoorsmen or thrill-seekers who knowingly accepted risks. They were 5 friends with intellectual and emotional challenges who depended on routine, familiar environments, and each other for stability. Their families had worked hard to create safe, structured lives for them through programs like Gateway projects. The idea that they would willingly venture into a dangerous wilderness area in winter conditions contradicts everything known about their personalities and capabilities. The investigation remains officially active, classified as both a missing person case for Gary Mathias and a homicide investigation. Despite the passage of nearly 5 decades, law enforcement continues to follow up on tips and leads when they arise. The families have never stopped seeking answers, and new developments in forensic science occasionally offer hope that fresh evidence might emerge. The tragic story of Gary Mathias, Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jackie Hewitt serves as a reminder of how quickly ordinary lives can be touched by inexplicable tragedy. These 5 friends, who had found strength and joy in their shared experiences, despite the challenges they faced, deserved better than the fate that befell them in the wilderness of Pluma's National Forest. Their families continue to honor their memory while seeking the truth about what happened during those final mysterious weeks. The Yuba County 5 case remains one of California's most baffling unsolved mysteries, a puzzle with too many missing pieces and too few logical explanations. The evidence suggests a tragedy that unfolded slowly, with multiple opportunities for rescue or survival that were somehow never realized. Whether the answer lies in human malice, mental health crisis, simple misfortune, or some combination of factors may never be known. What is certain is that 5 young men who depended on each other for support and friendship faced their final weeks alone in circumstances their families can barely comprehend. The memory of Gary, Ted, Jack, Bill, and Jackie lives on in the hearts of those who loved them, and their story continues to touch people around the world who are moved by this inexplicable tragedy. They were sons, brothers, and friends who found joy in simple pleasures like basketball games and each other's company. They deserve to grow old surrounded by the people who cared about them, not to face such a lonely and frightening end in the cold wilderness. Until answers are found, their families carry on, keeping their memory alive and hoping that someday, somehow, the truth about what happened to the Yuba County 5 will finally come to light. The unsolved case that still haunts Chicago after 17 years. On a cold February morning in 2008, a routine shopping trip became one of the most devastating unsolved crimes in Chicago history. 5 women, each with dreams and families waiting at home, lost their lives due to the actions of a man who walked into a Lane Bryant store in Tinley Park, Illinois, and changed everything forever. 17 years later, their families still wait for justice, and investigators still search for answers in a case that has haunted them through thousands of leads and countless sleepless nights. Saturday, February 2, 2008, started like any other day at the Lane Bryant clothing store in the Brookside Marketplace shopping center on 191st Street and Harlem Avenue in Tinley Park. Store manager Rhoda McFarland, a 42-year-old U.S. Air Force veteran and former pastor from Joliet, had planned for what she expected to be a busy day with a clearance sale at the popular plus-size women's clothing chain. The temperature outside was frigid, typical for a February morning in the Chicago suburbs. But inside the store, there was warmth and the promise of helping customers find clothing that made them feel confident and beautiful. Rhoda had opened the store that morning alongside a part-time employee preparing for the day ahead. The Lane Bryant chain was known for serving full-figured women, and the staff took pride in making their customers feel good about themselves. It was more than just a job for those who worked there. It was a place where they could make a real difference in people's lives. 2 customers were already browsing when the store officially opened, looking through the sale items and enjoying the welcoming atmosphere that Lane Bryant was known for. At approximately 10:04 a.m., everything changed when a man entered the store. He appeared to be a delivery driver, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who belonged there. He was described as a black man, just over 6 feet tall with a husky build and broad shoulders, between 25 and 35 years old with medium dark skin tone and distinctive cornrowed hair. One braid hung down his right cheek, decorated with 4 light green beads at the end. He wore black jeans with a rhinestone G embroidered over the back pockets, a dark grey cap, and a dark jacket. The man approached the staff as if he had legitimate business there, but his true intentions quickly became clear. He brandished a high-powered .40 caliber Glock handgun and announced he was robbing the store. The terrifying reality of the situation hit everyone present as this stranger took control of their morning, their safety, and ultimately their lives. He ordered the 2 employees and 2 customers who were in the store at the time to move to the back room, where he restrained them with duct tape and forced them to lie face down on the floor. As the minutes ticked by, the situation became even more dangerous when 2 additional customers entered the store, unaware of what was happening inside. The gunman confronted them as well, bringing the total number of hostages to 6 women, all now trapped in the back room of the store they had entered for such innocent reasons. During this terrifying ordeal, police confirmed that the suspect subjected at least one of the women to further harm beyond the robbery. Despite being restrained and facing unimaginable terror, store manager Rhoda McFarland somehow managed to work herself free. Drawing on the courage and leadership skills he had developed during her time in the U.S. Air Force, she reached for her cell phone and made what would become one of the most heartbreaking 911 calls in Chicago history. At 10:44 a.m., approximately 40 minutes into this nightmare, her whispered voice reached the emergency dispatcher. 911, emergency, the dispatcher answered, not knowing they were about to hear from a woman fighting desperately to save 6 lives. Lane Bryant, Rhoda whispered, trying to stay quiet while alerting authorities to their location and desperate situation. In the background of that chilling call, the gunman's agitated voice can be heard. He was clearly becoming more unstable as the situation continued, and his words would haunt investigators for years to come. "You're lucky," he said, his voice filled with dangerous tension. "I'm losing it." The phone went dead, and within minutes, the unthinkable happened. The gunman turned his weapon on the women. He believed he had eliminated all witnesses to his crime, but he was wrong about one crucial detail. When Tinley Park police officers arrived at the scene just 2 minutes after the 911 call ended, they discovered a scene that would stay with them forever. 5 women had lost their lives, but miraculously, the part-time employee had survived. In a moment that can only be described as divine intervention, she had shifted her head slightly just as the gunman fired, causing the shot to only graze her instead of being fatal. She lay perfectly still, pretending to be gone, until help arrived. The 5 women who lost their lives that day were more than just statistics in a police report. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends whose absence would leave permanent holes in the hearts of those who loved them. Jennifer Bishop, 34, of South Bend, Indiana, was an intensive care unit nurse who had dedicated her life to saving others. Her compassion and skill in caring for critically ill patients made her a beloved member of her hospital team, and her loss was felt deeply throughout the medical community. Carrie Hudek-Chiuso, 33, of Frankfurt, was a high school social worker who spent her days helping teenagers navigate the challenges of adolescence. She had chosen a career focused on making a positive difference in young people's lives, and her students and colleagues would remember her kindness and dedication long after she was gone. Sarah Shafransky, 22, of Oak Forest, had recently graduated from college and was just beginning to build her adult life. She represented hope and potential, with dreams and goals that would never be fulfilled. Connie Woolfolk, 37, of Flossmoor, worked as a real estate agent, helping families find homes where they could build their futures. She understood the importance of creating safe, comfortable spaces for people to live and grow, making her presence in that Lane Bryant store a place dedicated to helping women feel confident and beautiful, somehow fitting. And Rhoda McFarland, the store manager who had shown such courage in her final moments, was remembered not only for her military service and pastoral work, but for her leadership and the way she cared for both her employees and customers. The surviving employee, whose identity has been carefully protected by law enforcement, became the key to potentially solving this case. Despite the trauma she had endured, she worked closely with police to develop a detailed description of the suspect. Her emotional state was understandably fragile, and investigators had to proceed carefully, conducting interviews in stages to avoid re-traumatizing her while gathering crucial information. She's been able to go into some generalities about his physical appearance, Tinley Park Police Commander Rick Bruno explained at the time. But in order to get into details, we have to be very careful as to how we proceed and how much she can tolerate. The woman was placed in protective custody, and despite her own suffering, she remained committed to helping bring justice for her colleagues and the customers who had not survived. In a statement released through police, the survivor addressed the families of the 5 victims with words that revealed both her strength and her heartbreak. An unspeakable tragedy occurred, and 5 of the bravest women I have ever met were senselessly taken from their families, she said. Please know that during the unfathomable events of that day, their thoughts were focused on you and coming home. My heart aches that they were unable to do so, and I am working with the authorities in any way possible for all of the victims. The investigation that followed was immediate and intensive. Tinley Park Police threw every available resource at the case, establishing a dedicated war room that housed all the collected evidence and maintained full-time detectives working on leads. On February 11, 2008, just 9 days after the crime, police released their first sketch of the suspect based on the survivor's description, and within the first 24 hours, they received 24 leads. The leads continued to pour in as the case gained national attention. Grainy surveillance video taken from across the street showed a dark SUV and a dark sedan in the parking lot around the time of the incident, though it remained unclear whether either vehicle was connected to the gunman. The 911 call with the suspect's voice was also released to the public, hoping someone would recognize the man who had committed such a heinous act. As the years passed, the case evolved with new technology and investigative techniques. In 2018, on the 10th anniversary of the crime, police released a new 3D modeled image of the suspect, created using facial identification technology to make the original sketch more lifelike. Time goes by, but we've worked on it steadily for 10 years, continue to work on it. There's 5 women that need us to clear this up, Police Chief Steve Neubauer said at the time. Criminal profiler John Kelly, who has been working on the case through his organization system to apprehend lethal killers, Stalk Inc., has developed theories about the perpetrator's background and motivations. I believe he lives outside the area in a bigger city, Kelly told investigators. He has some experience about delivering to businesses, thus entering the back door and showing the manager the paperwork, a ruse for a delivery to get himself inside and look for cameras. Kelly's analysis suggests the gunman was impulsive and desperate for money, possibly driven by addiction, but was also a novice at robbery. He was a novice at robbing stores. A major lack of sophistication shows, Kelly explained. Why try to rob a store in broad daylight at approximately 10:30 in the morning with no mask? The timing made little sense from a criminal perspective, as cash from the previous day's sales would have already been deposited, and the early hour meant few customers would have been carrying significant amounts of money. The profiler believes the attack may not have been the suspect's first crime, and unfortunately may not have been his last. He's walking in without a mask, so he plans on silencing witnesses going in, Kelly observed. He thought he had eliminated everyone who he believed could identify him, probably changed the way he looked the next day. For the families of the victims, the passage of time has not diminished their need for answers. Morris Hamilton, Rhoda McFarlane's brother, continues to advocate for justice, understanding that closure requires more than just the passage of time. This person is still out there and could do harm to other people, he said, expressing the fear that haunts many who follow this case. The Tinley Park Police Department has maintained their commitment to solving this case, recently assigning 2 new detectives specifically to work on this cold case. They continue to offer a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest, and the investigation remains active with new leads still being pursued. Documentary filmmaker Charlie Min has recently created a film about the case, hoping that renewed attention might finally provide the breakthrough investigators need. This case, in my opinion, needs a temper tantrum, Min said, because we're going on 18 years. His sentiment reflects the frustration felt by many who believe that someone, somewhere, knows who committed this crime. The Lane Bryant store where the tragedy occurred is no longer there, but the impact of what happened that February morning continues to ripple through the community. The case represents one of the worst mass crimes in Chicago history, and its unsolved status serves as a reminder that justice delayed can feel like justice denied, especially for families who continue to grieve. As investigators continue their work, they hold on to hope that advances in technology, new witness information, or even a moment of conscience from someone who knows the truth might finally bring resolution to this case. The women who lost their lives that day deserve justice, and their families deserve answers. Until that day comes, the memory of Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Hudek-Chiuso, Rhoda McFarland, Sarah Shafransky, and Connie Woolfolk will continue to inspire those who refuse to give up the fight for truth. The Lane Bryant murders remind us that evil can strike anywhere, at any time, but they also remind us of the courage shown by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Rhoda McFarland's final act of bravery in making that 911 call, and the survivors' continued commitment to helping solve the case despite her trauma, represent the very best of human nature in the face of darkness. Their stories, and the stories of all 5 women who lost their lives, will not be forgotten as long as there are people willing to seek justice on their behalf. A teacher's secret nearly ended her life, but her survival changed everything. On a spring evening in April 2006, 17-year-old Ashley Reeves kissed her mother Michelle goodbye and told her she was heading out for a job interview at a local business in Belleville, Illinois. Ashley was a typical teenager living with her parents, Michelle Reeves and Tracy Green Koenig, along with her siblings Madison and Daniel Koenig. She had plans to meet friends afterward to play basketball, and her mother expected her home by 10 that night. Ashley never came home, and what followed would become one of the most shocking cases of survival in Illinois criminal history. Ashley had grown up in a loving family in Belleville, a small community where everyone seemed to know each other. Her parents had provided a stable home, and Ashley was known as a good student who maintained friendships and stayed involved in school activities. She had been dating a boy named Jeremy, whom her parents approved of, and she was looking forward to completing her junior year of high school. The family had no way of knowing that Ashley had been secretly involved with someone much older. someone who had once been in a position of trust in her life. That someone was Samson Shelton, a 26-year-old teacher who worked as a driver's education and physical education instructor at a local high school. Shelton had previously taught at the middle school Ashley attended, though he was not her direct teacher at the time of the incident. Known in professional wrestling circles as the teacher, Shelton had cultivated relationships with students that crossed professional boundaries. According to later testimony, he and Ashley had developed what he described as a friendship that had become inappropriate. When Ashley failed to return home that Friday evening, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. They contacted the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. Ashley's car was found abandoned with the clothes she had planned to wear to her job interview still inside, along with the workout gear she intended to change into for basketball with her friends. The clothing had never been worn, indicating she never made it to her interview. Her parents and law enforcement began reaching out to anyone who might know where Ashley had gone. Michelle Reeves, desperate for any information about her daughter, began calling numbers from Ashley's phone bill. One number appeared more frequently than others, so she reached out to that person, who turned out to be Samson Shelton. When Michelle called, Shelton claimed he had no idea where Ashley might be and told her he hadn't seen her. After speaking with Ashley's mother, investigators learned that Shelton went out dancing at a local club that same evening. As the search intensified, Ashley's friends provided crucial information to investigators. They revealed that Ashley had been seeing an older man and had planned to meet him on the night she disappeared. This information led detectives to bring Shelton in for questioning at the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office on April 28, 2006. What followed was a 12-hour interrogation that would ultimately lead to one of the most dramatic rescues in the department's history. Shelton appeared calm and collected when he arrived at the sheriff's office after coaching a high school baseball practice. Over the course of the interrogation, his story changed multiple times. Initially, he claimed Ashley was a persistent young woman who had been pursuing him and making constant phone calls. He portrayed himself as the victim of unwanted attention from a teenage girl. As the questioning continued, Shelton's story evolved. He eventually admitted to having an inappropriate relationship with Ashley, telling investigators, "I will say this, we never kissed. We never kissed. Yes, we did have a sexual encounter in the back of the vehicle, and after that day, I felt absolutely terrible about that." This admission marked a significant shift in his account of their relationship. Hours later, Shelton changed his story again. He claimed that he and Ashley had been together on the day she disappeared and that there had been some kind of incident, but he insisted he hadn't hurt her. According to this version, Ashley had become upset in his car, and he had stopped and let her out on the side of the road. She was screaming and kicking and everything. So I got her out of the car, shut the door, ran the car. I took off. I left her, Shelton told investigators. But the inconsistencies in his story were apparent to the experienced investigators questioning him. Detective Steve Johnson, who led the interrogation, recognized the signs of deception. As the hours passed, the pressure mounted, and finally, Shelton broke down and confessed to what had really happened. According to Shelton's confession, he had been trying to end his relationship with Ashley. On April 27, 2006, they had gotten into an argument while he was driving. In a moment of rage, Shelton said he had unbuckled Ashley's seat belt and tried to physically remove her from the moving vehicle. During this struggle, she was badly injured and became unresponsive. Believing he had caused serious harm, Shelton drove to Citizens Park in Belleville. What Shelton did next would haunt investigators for years to come. He carried Ashley into the wooded area of the park. To make it appear as though she had been harmed there rather than in his vehicle, he tightened his belt around her neck. Convinced that Ashley had lost her life, he left her in the woods and returned home. Upon hearing this confession, investigators immediately organized a search and rescue operation. Shelton led them to the wooded area where he claimed to have left Ashley. The officers expected to be conducting a recovery mission, searching for a young woman who had been gone for over 24 hours. What they found instead would become one of the most remarkable discoveries in law enforcement history. At approximately 2 in the morning on April 29, 2006, more than 30 hours after Ashley had disappeared, searchers found her in the woods. Against all odds, she was still breathing. You can recall them shouting, saying she's still breathing and get medics in here, to get her some help, recalled Sergeant James Hendricks, describing the moment captured on video. Ashley Reeves had survived an attempt on her life and 30 hours alone in the cold, unable to move. Ashley's condition was critical when emergency responders reached her. She had severe injuries to her neck, her body was covered in mud and insect bites, and she had sustained serious trauma. She was conscious but paralyzed and unable to speak. The young woman who had kissed her mother goodbye 2 nights earlier was now fighting for her life in every sense. The extent of Ashley's injuries was devastating. She faced a broken neck, brain trauma, and numerous other complications. Doctors worked around the clock to stabilize her condition, but the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Ashley faced the daunting task of relearning basic functions that most people take for granted. Over the following months, Ashley embarked on an extraordinary journey of recovery. She had to relearn how to swallow, talk, walk, and move her head and arms. The brain injury had affected her memory, and she had no recollection of the events that had left her fighting for her life. Physical therapists, speech therapists, and medical professionals worked with her daily as she slowly regained her strength and abilities. The recovery process was not just physical, but emotional as well. Ashley faced challenges within her own community, where rumors and victim blaming unfortunately occurred. Some people questioned her story or suggested she was somehow responsible for what had happened to her. This additional burden made her healing process even more difficult, as she not only had to recover from her physical injuries, but also cope with the social aftermath of the crime. Despite these challenges, Ashley demonstrated remarkable resilience. Police Chief Stephen Johnson, who had been involved in the case, later described her as tough, one of the toughest people that you would meet. Her determination to rebuild her life became an inspiration to those who knew her story. Even as she struggled with her recovery, Ashley maintained her dignity and strength. As Ashley worked on her recovery, the legal proceedings against Samson Shelton moved forward. Initially charged with multiple counts, including attempted murder and aggravated kidnapping, the case eventually focused on the most serious charge. However, the legal process was complicated by Shelton's mental state. In May 2007, while out on bond, Shelton attempted to take his own life at his mother's home. The incident occurred when a family member called emergency services to report that Shelton had overdosed and was unresponsive. When paramedics and sheriff's deputies arrived, Shelton had regained consciousness, but became combative, punching and kicking the responders. Deputies were forced to subdue him with a stun gun, and he was hospitalized under 24-hour guard. This incident raised questions about Shelton's mental competency to stand trial. After psychiatric evaluation, a judge determined that Shelton was mentally fit to proceed with the legal case. The evaluation cleared the way for the resolution of the charges against him. However, the legal team representing Ashley and her family had to consider the toll that a lengthy trial would take on the young woman who was still recovering from her injuries. On January 29, 2009, nearly 3 years after the attack, Samson Shelton stood before a judge in St. Clair County Court. Ashley Reeves, now 18 years old, watched from the back of the courtroom as her former teacher faced justice. When the judge asked for Shelton's plea, he spoke 3 words that would finally bring closure to the case. "Guilty, Your Honor." Shelton pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The plea agreement meant that Ashley would not have to testify about her ordeal, sparing her from reliving the traumatic events in court. St. Clair County State's Attorney Robert Hyder explained that the sentence represented serious time and would help Ashley move forward with her life. Ashley's response to the sentencing was measured and mature. "I'm glad it's over with," she said. expressing relief that the legal proceedings had concluded. "I just want to continue with my life and not worry about it," she added, demonstrating the same strength that had carried her through her recovery. By the time of Shelton's sentencing, Ashley had graduated from high school and was making plans to attend college. The case had a profound impact on everyone involved. Shelton's mother, Susan, expressed her family's reluctant acceptance of the plea deal, claiming they felt he wouldn't have received a fair trial due to public sentiment. However, for Ashley's family and the investigators who had worked tirelessly to solve the case, justice had finally been served. Detective Steve Johnson, who had conducted the crucial interrogation that led to Ashley's rescue, reflected on the case years later. He emphasized how close they had come to tragedy and how fortunate they were to have found Ashley alive. This very well could have been a case where they came a couple of days later and she was actually deceased, he noted. The successful outcome was a testament to thorough police work and Ashley's incredible will to survive. In June 2007, Shelton began serving his 20-year sentence at the Illinois River Correctional Center. For the next 17 years, he remained incarcerated while Ashley continued rebuilding her life. She pursued her education, built relationships, and gradually moved forward from the trauma that had nearly claimed her life. Her story became an example of resilience and the human capacity to overcome even the most devastating circumstances. Ashley's recovery was not just about regaining physical abilities, but also about reclaiming her identity and future. She worked with medical professionals, therapists, and counselors to address both the physical and emotional aspects of her trauma. Over time, she was able to build a new normal for herself, though the scars of her experience would always remain. The case gained national attention and was later adapted into a Lifetime movie titled Left for Dead. The Ashley Reeves story. The film, starring Anwen O'Driscoll as Ashley and Jenny Garth as her mother Michelle, brought renewed attention to the remarkable story of survival. The production worked closely with Ashley and her family to ensure the story was told respectfully and accurately. In April 2024, nearly 18 years after the attack, Samson Shelton was released from prison on parole. He had served approximately 17 years of his 20-year sentence and was eligible for early release under Illinois parole guidelines. The news of his release brought the case back into public attention and reignited discussions about justice, rehabilitation, and the impact of violent crime on survivors. When contacted about Shelton's release, Ashley, now in her 30s, expressed her desire to move forward. "It's been a long and challenging road, but I'm focused on my future and continuing to heal," she told reporters. Her response demonstrated the same grace and strength that had characterized her recovery journey. She had built a life for herself beyond the trauma, and she was determined not to let Shelton's release derail her progress. The Ashley Reeves case stands as a testament to the power of human resilience and the dedication of law enforcement professionals. It illustrates how a thorough investigation and the refusal to give up can make the difference between life and death. Detective Johnson's skilled interrogation techniques were crucial in breaking down Shelton's lies and leading to Ashley's rescue. Without that breakthrough, Ashley might never have been found alive. The case also highlights the complex issues surrounding inappropriate relationships between educators and students. Shelton had been in a position of trust and authority, first as Ashley's former middle school teacher and later as an adult who should have maintained appropriate boundaries. His betrayal of that trust not only harmed Ashley directly, but also damaged the broader community's faith in educational institutions. For the medical professionals who treated Ashley, her case represented both a challenge and a triumph. The severity of her injuries required innovative treatment approaches and intensive rehabilitation. Her recovery became a source of inspiration for other patients facing similar challenges, proving that even the most devastating injuries could be overcome with determination and proper support. Ashley Reeves endured unthinkable hardship, spent 30 grueling hours alone in the woods, and had to rebuild herself from the ground up. Yet she emerged from this experience as a symbol of hope and survival. Her story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, the human spirit can prevail against overwhelming odds. Today, Ashley continues to live her life with the same strength and grace that carried her through her darkest hours. She has moved forward, built relationships, and created meaning from her experience. While the physical and emotional scars of her ordeal will always remain, she has refused to let them define her future. Her journey from victim to survivor to thriver serves as an inspiration to anyone facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. As we reflect on Ashley Reeves' story, we are reminded of the importance of speaking up when something doesn't feel right, of thoroughly investigating missing person cases, and of never giving up hope. Her case shows us that miracles can happen, that survival is possible even in the most dire circumstances, and that the human capacity for healing and growth knows no bounds. Ashley Reeves didn't just survive an attempt on her life. She reclaimed her future and became a beacon of hope for others facing their own battles. The legacy of the Ashley Reeves case extends beyond one young woman's remarkable survival story. It serves as a reminder to all of us about the importance of protecting our most vulnerable community members, the dedication required of those who serve in law enforcement, and the incredible strength that exists within the human spirit. Ashley Reeves faced the unthinkable and emerged victorious, and her story will continue to inspire others for generations to come. She never came home from Walmart, the chilling reason why. Lori Ann Slesinski was 24 years old when she disappeared on a warm Saturday evening in Auburn, Alabama. She was a recent college graduate, full of life and promise, planning nothing more than a simple girls' night with her best friend. What should have been an ordinary weekend turned into a 16-year mystery that would expose dark secrets and ultimately reveal the dangerous truth about someone she thought she could trust. Lori had grown up in a loving family environment, the daughter of Arlene and Casey Slesinski. Her mother Arlene worked as a nurse in a home for the elderly, while her father Casey provided steady support for their family. When Lori decided to attend Auburn University, her parents made the significant financial commitment to purchase a mobile home for her in a manicured trailer park popular among students. This home represented their investment in her future and their confidence in her ability to succeed. Lori thrived at Auburn, building friendships and earning her degree while living independently in the supportive college town. After graduation, Lori remained in Auburn, working and maintaining the close relationships she had built during her college years. She was known for her reliability and her deep love for her dog, Peanut, whom she treated like family. Those who knew her best understood that Lori would never abandon her beloved pet or disappear without explanation. She lived a stable life, maintaining regular contact with her parents and keeping consistent work schedules that made her absence immediately noticeable to those who cared about her. Among her circle of acquaintances was Daryl Richard Ennis, known as Rick, a man with whom she had developed what she believed was a friendship. Rick was older than Lori and carried himself with a confidence that masked a deeply troubled past. Unknown to Lori and most others in their community, Rick harbored dark secrets from his childhood that would later prove relevant to her tragic story. On Saturday evening, June 10, 2006, Lori made plans to visit her best friend Braun for what they called a girls' night. They intended to have drinks, watch movies, and enjoy each other's company in the comfort and safety of Braun's home. Before heading over, Lori called her friend around 6:30 in the evening to confirm she was on her way. She mentioned needing to stop at the store first, a simple errand that would later be confirmed by security cameras at the local Walmart. That stop at Walmart would be the last verified sighting of Lori alive. Store surveillance captured her making her purchases, appearing normal and unhurried, giving no indication of distress or danger. However, she never arrived at Braun's house. When hours passed without Lori's arrival, Braun became concerned and began calling her friends home, leaving messages on the answering machine that would go unanswered. The next day, Sunday, June 11, Braun's concern deepened when her calls continued to go unreturned. This was completely unlike Laurie, who was known for her reliability and consistent communication with friends. Braun knew something was seriously wrong, particularly because Laurie would never have left Peanut alone for an extended period. The dog remained at Laurie's trailer, unfed and distressed, which immediately raised alarm bells for anyone who knew how much Laurie cared for her pet. By Monday, June 12, when Laurie failed to show up for work, the situation became undeniably serious. Her employer contacted Arlene Slesinski with the troubling news that her daughter had not appeared for her shift. Arlene immediately knew something was terribly wrong. As a mother, she understood that her responsible daughter would never simply fail to show up for work without explanation. The combination of missed work, unreturned phone calls, and an abandoned pet painted a picture of something far more sinister than a spontaneous trip or temporary absence. On Tuesday, June 13, 2006, Arlene Slesinski made the agonizing drive from her home to Auburn to file a missing person report with local police. During that drive, she contacted her husband Casey and the Auburn Police Department, her maternal instincts telling her that every moment counted. When she arrived at Laurie's trailer, the scene confirmed her worst fears. Peanut was there alone, and there were signs that Laurie had left suddenly, without the preparation she would have made for even a short trip. Initially, Auburn police treated the case as a standard missing person investigation. In a college town like Auburn, young people sometimes disappeared temporarily, often returning after a few days with explanations of spontaneous trips or personal crises. However, those familiar with the case immediately understood this situation was different. Laurie's reliability, her love for her dog, and her consistent communication patterns all indicated that her disappearance was involuntary. The investigation took a dramatic turn on June 14, 2006, when Laurie's vehicle was discovered engulfed in flames at 4:41 in the morning. The car was found on a desolate dead-end road near a construction site not far from her trailer park home. The timing and location of the fire immediately suggested foul play. Someone had deliberately destroyed the vehicle, likely to eliminate evidence, and had chosen a remote location to minimize the chances of immediate discovery. The destroyed car transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a potential homicide. Investigators began examining Laurie's final known activities and associations, looking for anyone who might have had reason to harm her. During this process, Rick Ennis emerged as a person of interest. He claimed to have been with Laurie on the day she disappeared and provided investigators with information about her activities that day. Rick told investigators that he had spent time with Laurie on June 10th, claiming they had been intimate and that she had left his presence to purchase illegal substances. This account immediately raised suspicions among investigators, who found no evidence to support his claims about Laurie's alleged involvement with illicit substances. Those who knew Laurie best strongly disputed any suggestion that she was involved in illegal activities, describing her as responsible and law-abiding. As investigators dug deeper into Rick Ennis's background, they uncovered disturbing information about his past that had been hidden from the community. In 1993, when Rick was just 12 years old, he had taken the lives of his stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, and his mother, Linda Dolly Flowers, in an act that shocked everyone who later learned about it. Despite the severity of his actions, Rick had been released from the juvenile justice system when he reached the age of 21, having served his sentence and attempting 2 unsuccessful escapes during his confinement. This information about Rick's past was not initially known to Laurie or others in their social circle. The juvenile justice system's confidentiality protections had allowed Rick to enter adulthood without his community being aware of his history of extreme violence. This lack of knowledge potentially put others, including Laurie, at risk of forming relationships with someone whose capacity for harm had already been demonstrated. Despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding Laurie's disappearance and Rick's questionable statements to investigators, the case initially went cold. Without Laurie's remains, and with limited physical evidence immediately available, prosecutors felt they lacked sufficient grounds for charges. Rick Ennis left the Auburn area after being questioned by detectives, effectively removing himself from ongoing investigation and surveillance. For years, the case remained unsolved, causing ongoing anguish for Laurie's family and friends. Arlene and Casey Slesinski lived with the uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to their daughter, unable to properly grieve or find closure. The lack of answers consumed their lives, while Rick Ennis remained free, potentially posing a continued threat to other women who might encounter him. In 2016, the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation established a cold case unit specifically designed to revisit unsolved crimes using new technologies and investigative techniques. The unit selected Laurie Ann Slesinski's disappearance as their first case, recognizing both the solvability of the investigation and the importance of bringing closure to her family. This decision would prove to be pivotal in finally achieving justice for Laurie. The cold case investigators brought fresh perspectives and advanced forensic capabilities to evidence that had been collected years earlier. They re-examined physical evidence using improved DNA analysis techniques and took a comprehensive approach to building a case that could withstand the scrutiny of a criminal trial. Their work would eventually uncover crucial evidence that had not been fully utilized in the original investigation. On August 6, 2018, 12 years after Laurie's disappearance, police arrested Daryl Richard Ennis and charged him with her death. The arrest came after investigators had tested new and existing evidence using advanced techniques, finally building the strong case that had eluded them years earlier. The charges represented both capital crimes, reflecting the seriousness of the allegations and the strength of the evidence that investigators had compiled. The evidence against Rick Ennis was comprehensive and compelling. Forensic testing had revealed his DNA in blood, found on the door of Laurie's trailer, indicating that he had been present and injured while at her home, likely during a physical altercation. Additional evidence containing his DNA was discovered on rugs that investigators believed had originally been in Laurie's kitchen, suggesting the crime scene had been disturbed and evidence removed. Investigators also found Rick's DNA inside Laurie's trailer, which he later claimed resulted from consensual relations. However, the location and context of this evidence, combined with other findings, painted a different picture of what had occurred. The presence of his DNA at multiple locations within the trailer suggested a struggle rather than the casual visit he had described to investigators. At the scene where Laurie's car was discovered burned, investigators found a hand-rolled cigarette containing Rick's DNA. This evidence suggested he had been present when the vehicle was destroyed, contradicting his claims about his activities that night. The cigarette represented a crucial piece of evidence linking him directly to the destruction of evidence in the case. When Rick was questioned years later, investigators noticed scratches on his arms that he claimed came from his dog. However, prosecutors believed these injuries were consistent with defensive wounds that Laurie might have caused while trying to protect herself. The timing and appearance of these scratches supported the theory that Rick had been injured during a struggle with the victim. Additional evidence found in Rick's vehicle included knives and handcuffs, items that prosecutors argued were consistent with someone who had planned or was prepared to commit crimes. While Rick's defense team would later argue these items had innocent explanations, their presence added to the mounting evidence suggesting his involvement in Laurie's disappearance. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from testimony by Terry Booth, a co-worker who testified that Rick had made incriminating statements about the case. According to Booth's testimony, Rick had told him that he had to take a woman's life, a statement that prosecutors argued was essentially a confession to the crime. This testimony provided crucial insight into Rick's own words about what had happened to Laurie. The trial of Rick Ennis began on April 1, 2022, after delays caused by COVID-19 shutdowns had postponed proceedings for years. The delay had been particularly difficult for Laurie's family. who had waited 16 years for their day in court, and the possibility of finally learning the truth about what had happened to their daughter. Lee County District Attorney Jessica Ventier led the prosecution's case, presenting the extensive evidence that investigators had compiled over the years. She called Laurie's mother and friends to testify about her character and reliability, establishing for the jury that this was not someone who would voluntarily disappear or abandon her beloved pet. These witnesses painted a picture of a responsible young woman whose sudden absence was completely out of character. The prosecution methodically presented the physical evidence linking Rick to the crime scene and the destruction of Laurie's vehicle. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found in multiple locations, explaining to jurors how this evidence supported the theory that Rick had been involved in a violent encounter with Laurie at her home. The scientific testimony provided objective support for the prosecution's theory of what had occurred. Ventier also ensured that jurors heard about Rick's past, though legal restrictions prevented them from learning the full details of his juvenile crimes during the trial itself. The prosecution was able to establish that Rick had a history of violence, providing important context for understanding his capacity to commit the crime charged. This background information helped jurors understand the defendant's character and potential for violence. Rick Ennis chose to testify in his own defense, a decision that would prove problematic for his case. Under cross-examination by Prosecutor Ventier, he was forced to address the physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. When asked about his DNA being found in blood at Laurie's trailer, Rick could only respond, "I have no idea," an answer that likely seemed implausible to jurors given the strength of the forensic evidence. During his testimony, Rick maintained his innocence and stuck to his original story that he and Laurie had consensual relations and that he had last seen her when she left to purchase illicit substances. However, his account was contradicted by the physical evidence and by testimony from those who knew Laurie best. His inability to provide convincing explanations for the evidence against him likely damaged his credibility with the jury. When Prosecutor Ventier directly asked Rick where he had disposed of Laurie's remains, he denied any involvement in her death or the disposal of her remains. His denial was delivered in front of Laurie's family, who had waited 16 years to hear what had happened to their daughter. The courtroom moment was emotionally charged, representing both the prosecution's confidence in their case and the family's ongoing search for answers. Rick's defense attorney, Todd Crutchfield, attempted to challenge the investigation's integrity, suggesting that evidence had been planted and that investigators had focused too narrowly on his client. Crutchfield argued that the 18-month cold case investigation was not a genuine attempt to find the truth, but rather a targeted effort to build a case against Rick. However, this strategy appeared to have limited success given the strength and variety of evidence against the defendant. The defense also suggested that someone had deliberately planted Rick's DNA at various locations to frame him for the crime. However, this theory faced significant logical problems, particularly regarding the cigarette found at the car fire scene. As prosecutors pointed out, if someone had planted this evidence years earlier, they would have needed to know that DNA testing would eventually link it to Rick, making the planting theory seem far-fetched. After hearing all the evidence and testimony, the jury began their deliberations on the case that had captivated the community for 16 years. The weight of their decision was enormous, as they held the power to finally provide answers to Laurie's family or to allow Rick Ennis to escape accountability for what prosecutors argued was a carefully planned and executed crime. On April 14, 2022, after 2 days of careful deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. They found Daryl Richard Ennis guilty on 2 counts of capital offense in the 2006 death of Laurie Ann Slesinski. The verdict represented a culmination of 16 years of investigation and the validation of the evidence that investigators had painstakingly compiled. For Laurie's family, it marked the end of years of uncertainty and the beginning of a different kind of closure. Following the guilty verdict, the court moved to the sentencing phase. Although prosecutors had initially sought the death penalty for Rick Ennis, circumstances led to a different outcome. Arlene Slesinski and the district attorney agreed to remove the death penalty from consideration in exchange for a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This decision was made to spare the family from years of potential appeals that would have accompanied a death sentence. Judge Walker sentenced Rick Ennis to life in prison without parole on April 14, 2022, ensuring that he would never again be free to harm another person. For Arlene Slesinski, this sentence represented the justice she had sought while also providing the certainty that Rick would never be released. As she told reporters, "As long as he's locked away for life, that's all that matters to me. I don't want to be dragged through this for the rest of my life." 2 days after the verdict and sentencing, on April 16, 2022, new information emerged that provided additional context for Rick's conviction. His stepsister, who had been on his alleged hit list years earlier, released a public statement revealing the details of Rick's juvenile crimes that had not been admissible during the trial. She wanted the public to understand that the man just convicted of taking Laurie's life had also taken the lives of Eddie Joe and Linda Dolly Flowers when he was 12 years old. This revelation added another layer to the tragedy of Laurie's case, highlighting how a system designed to rehabilitate juvenile offenders had potentially failed to protect future victims. Rick's violent past, hidden by juvenile confidentiality laws, had allowed him to enter adulthood without his community being aware of his capacity for extreme violence. This lack of knowledge may have contributed to Laurie's willingness to maintain a friendship with someone whose true nature remained concealed. Despite the conviction and life sentence, Laurie Ann Slesinski's remains have never been recovered. Rick Ennis has maintained his innocence and has never provided information about what he did with her remains, leaving her family without the closure that comes from being able to properly lay their loved one to rest. This ongoing mystery represents the final cruelty in a case marked by violence, deception, and the destruction of a young life full of promise. The successful prosecution of Rick Ennis demonstrated that justice can be achieved even in cases without recovered remains, when sufficient evidence exists to prove that a crime occurred. District Attorney Jessica Ventier's words during sentencing captured this principle. "You should not get a prize for body disposal. You should be held accountable for their crime, even though you were really good at dumping it." The case established an important precedent for future prosecutions in similar circumstances. The Laurie Slesinski case stands as a testament to the importance of never giving up on victims and their families. Through the dedicated work of cold case investigators and the persistence of prosecutors, justice was finally achieved after 16 long years. While Rick Ennis will spend the rest of his life in prison, the memory of Laurie Ann Slesinski lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and her story serves as a reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The home invasion that exposed a chilling secret. On September 6, 2006, Susan Kuhnhausen returned to her southeast Portland home after finishing her shift as an emergency room nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. Instead, she found herself fighting for her life in an encounter that would expose a shocking betrayal by someone she trusted most. What happened that night transformed an ordinary nurse into a symbol of survival, revealing the dark truth behind what appeared to be a random home invasion. Susan Kuhnhausen had dedicated 30 years of her life to emergency medicine, building a career helping others during their most vulnerable moments. At 51 years old, she was a skilled professional who had seen trauma, violence, and human suffering in ways that few people ever experience. Her marriage to Michael Kuhnhausen had lasted 18 years, but by 2006, their relationship had reached a breaking point. The couple was in the midst of divorce proceedings, a situation that had created tension and emotional strain for both parties. Susan was ready to move forward with her life, but her husband was struggling to accept the end of their marriage. That evening, as Susan entered her home, she discovered a handwritten note from Michael that read, "Sue, haven't been sleeping. Had to get away, went to the beach." The message mentioned that he had seen her on Friday or Saturday, creating an eerie sense that something was not quite right. Susan made her way toward their shared bedroom, unaware that danger was waiting just steps away. Hidden behind the bedroom door was Edward Dalton Haffey, a 59-year-old man with an extensive criminal history who had been paid $50,000 to end her life. Haffey had come prepared for what he believed would be a simple task. Wearing latex gloves underneath yellow rubber gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, he was armed with a claw hammer and had planned to make Susan's passing appear as though it resulted from a robbery gone wrong. When Susan entered the bedroom, Haffey jumped from his hiding place and struck her in the left temple with the hammer. The blow was meant to incapacitate her quickly, but Haffey had seriously underestimated his intended victim. Susan's 3 decades in emergency medicine had taught her more than just medical procedures. Her work environment had required her to learn self-defense techniques, and her experience with trauma patients had given her an understanding of how violence unfolds. More importantly, her years of making life-and-death decisions under pressure had prepared her mentally for moments of extreme crisis. When Haffey's hammer struck her head, Susan's training and instincts took over immediately. Rather than collapsing or fleeing in panic, Susan fought back with remarkable determination. She tackled Haffey and pushed him against the wall, using her physical strength to gain an advantage. During the struggle, Haffey spoke the only words she would hear him say that night: "You're strong." Those words confirmed what Susan had already realized. This was not a random burglary. As she later explained to investigators, he didn't ask any burglar things: "Where's your money? Where's your safe?" It became quickly clear that his intent was to cause her to lose her life due to his actions. And I fought. The battle for Susan's life lasted at least 14 minutes, during which both participants sustained serious harm. Susan managed to wrestle the hammer away from Haffey and struck him several times while demanding, "Who sent you?" When he refused to answer and regained control of the weapon, Susan grabbed his throat and began choking him. She noticed him struggling for breath before releasing her grip and attempting to escape. Haffey caught Susan in the hallway and began hitting her repeatedly. Desperate to survive and knowing that any evidence linking her attacker to his employer might be crucial, Susan bit Haffey's arm and thigh, hoping her teeth marks would help investigators identify him. The physical struggle continued until Susan was able to climb on top of Haffey and apply a chokehold with her left arm. Despite his attempts to throw her off, her self-defense training allowed her to maintain control. Eventually, Edward Haffey stopped moving. When the ordeal finally ended, Susan grabbed the hammer and ran to her neighbor's house to call for help. Police arrived to find Haffey no longer alive in the Kuhnhausen home, along with yellow rubber gloves, a bottle of chocolate syrup, and diabetes medication in his possession. The investigation that followed would reveal the full scope of the conspiracy against Susan's life. Edward Haffey was no stranger to violent crime. His criminal record included convictions for robbery, burglary, and substance-related charges. But most significantly, he had been convicted in 1994 of conspiracy connected to the death of his ex-girlfriend, Georgia Dutton. Haffey had served 9 years of a 20-year sentence and was released from the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution in 2003, just 3 years before the attack on Susan. His history of arranging violence for hire made him an ideal candidate for Michael Kuhnhausen's deadly plan. The connection between Haffey and Michael Kuhnhausen became clear when investigators discovered evidence of their relationship. Haffey had worked as a janitor for Michael at an adult bookstore, giving them regular contact. In Haffey's daily planner, police found an entry dated September 4 that read, "Call Mike," along with Michael Kuhnhausen's phone number. Additional evidence emerged when witness Harold Jones told police that he had driven Haffey to an Applebee's restaurant a few days before the attack, where Haffey met with a man who was willing to pay him $50,000 to end his wife's life. The investigation also revealed how Michael had facilitated the attack. Police determined that he had disabled the home security alarm system, allowing Haffey to enter the house undetected. There were no signs of forced entry, indicating that the intruder had used a key or had been let inside. Michael's cell phone number was found in Haffey's backpack, providing additional evidence of their connection. When Michael was arrested 8 days after the botched attack, police found him carrying a .357 Magnum pistol, similar to one he had purchased at a pawn shop. Michael Kuhnhausen went into hiding immediately after learning that his plan had failed and that Susan had survived. Police located him 1 week later, approximately 10 miles from Providence Portland Medical Center, where Susan worked. His daughter, Angela Kuhnhausen, told authorities that her father had left what appeared to be a note expressing intentions to harm himself and had recently purchased the firearm found in his possession. The emotional impact on Susan was profound and immediate. When she learned that night that Haffey had lost his life during their struggle, her first thoughts were not of relief or victory, but of compassion. "I immediately began to think about his family," she recalled during an interview. "Everybody has somebody who loves them. Children, a wife, a mother, a dad. The worst of this is not that somebody tried to cause me to lose my life, but that I had to end someone else's life to survive. But I have no shame because I did not choose this outcome for him. I chose my life. I chose life." The day after the attack, Susan filed for divorce and changed her last name to Walters, symbolically separating herself from the man who had arranged her attempted demise. The legal proceedings that followed would bring both justice and additional emotional challenges. On September 21, 2006, Michael Kuhnhausen appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to charges of criminal conspiracy to commit aggravated violence and attempted aggravated violence. He remained in custody with bail set at $500,000. However, by August 30, 2007, Michael changed his plea to guilty on charges of solicitation to commit aggravated violence. The sentencing hearing provided Susan with an opportunity to confront the man who had tried to have her eliminated. In an hour-long victim impact statement delivered to the Multnomah County Circuit Court, Susan held up photographs of herself after the attack and addressed her former husband directly. "You told police that you found out I was okay. Do I look okay?" she asked, forcing him to face the reality of the harm he had orchestrated. The courtroom was filled with emotion as Susan described the lasting impact of his betrayal and the trauma of defending her own life. Michael's response to the charges and his sentencing was notably brief and inadequate. Just before receiving his sentence, he told the court, "I hurt a lot of people over the past year and I'm sorry. That's all I can say, I'm sorry." The judge sentenced Michael Kuhnhausen to 10 years in prison, a punishment that many observers, including Susan herself, felt was insufficient given the premeditated nature of his crime. The legal consequences extended beyond Michael's criminal conviction. Susan filed a civil lawsuit against her former husband, seeking damages for the emotional distress and trauma caused by his actions. After a 2-day civil trial that concluded on March 7, 2008, a jury awarded Susan $1 million in damages. However, as court records noted, it was unlikely that she would ever collect the full amount of this judgment. Susan's transformation from victim to survivor did not end with the legal proceedings. She became an advocate for crime victims and began working with law enforcement agencies to help others facing similar situations. Her experience and survival story made her a valuable resource for the Portland Police Bureau's Women's Strength and Girl Strength programs, where she shared self-defense expertise and provided guidance to other women. She also became involved in developing victim services, including helping to create a crime victims portal for Multnomah County. As a motivational speaker, Susan has used her experience to help others understand the importance of preparation, awareness, and the will to survive. Her story has been featured in numerous television programs, documentaries, and articles, serving as both inspiration and education for those who might face similar dangers. She has emphasized that survival often depends not just on physical strength, but on mental preparation and the determination to keep fighting even when circumstances seem hopeless. The case also highlighted broader issues about domestic violence and the extreme lengths to which some individuals will go to avoid divorce proceedings. Michael's willingness to arrange his wife's demise rather than accept the end of their marriage represented a particularly severe form of intimate partner violence. The fact that he chose to hire a professional with a history of violence rather than accept the divorce showed the calculated nature of his actions. Edward Haffey's role in the conspiracy revealed the dangers posed by individuals with extensive criminal histories who are willing to commit violence for money. His previous conviction for arranging harm against Georgia Dutton, his ex-girlfriend, demonstrated a pattern of using violence to solve personal problems. The fact that he had been released from prison after serving only 9 years of a 20-year sentence raised questions about the adequacy of supervision for individuals convicted of such serious offenses. Michael Kuhnhausen never had the opportunity to complete his 10-year sentence. On June 16, 2014, he passed away while serving his time at the Snake River Correctional Institution in Ontario, Oregon, at the age of 65. His death brought a complex mixture of emotions for Susan, who had spent years wondering if she would be safe when he was eventually released. Today, Susan Walters continues her work as an advocate and survivor. Her experience has transformed her from someone who narrowly escaped becoming a victim into a powerful voice for others facing violence and trauma. She has worked extensively with victim services organizations and continues to provide guidance to law enforcement agencies dealing with domestic violence cases. The Susan Kuhnhausen case serves as a reminder that survival often depends on preparation, determination, and the courage to fight back when faced with life-threatening situations. Susan's 30 years of emergency medical experience, combined with her self-defense training and quick thinking, allowed her to overcome what should have been an insurmountable disadvantage. Her story demonstrates that even in the darkest moments, when betrayed by those closest to us, the human spirit's determination to survive can prevail. Her journey from that terrifying September night to becoming an advocate for others shows that survival is not just about the physical act of defending oneself, but also about finding meaning and purpose in the aftermath of trauma. Susan Walters chose not to let her experience define her as a victim, but instead used it to help protect and empower others who might face similar dangers. Through her advocacy work, speaking engagements, and collaboration with law enforcement, she has ensured that her survival serves a greater purpose in the fight against domestic violence and crime. The legacy of this case extends beyond one woman's remarkable survival story to encompass broader lessons about recognizing warning signs, preparing for danger, and never underestimating the power of the human will to live. Susan Kuhnhausen's courage on that September night, and her continued dedication to helping others in the years since, stands as a testament to the strength that can emerge from even the most terrifying circumstances. The Last Light On, the story of Alexis Murphy. On the evening of August 3, 2013, 17-year-old Alexis Tiara Murphy left her Shipman, Virginia home with excitement in her voice and pink on her clothes. She lived with her mother, Laura Murphy, and her grandmother, Gail Taylor, in a close-knit household where Alexis was known as the bright light that filled every room. Her grandmother had always called Alexis a scared kind of person who never liked walking from the car to the house in the dark, so she would call several times on her way home to make sure someone was there to greet her. That night, as Alexis prepared to leave for Lynchburg to buy hair extensions for her senior pictures, her grandmother told her to take a house key, even though Alexis said she'd be home before 10:30 p.m. The grandmother left a light on for her granddaughter, as she always did. Alexis was a beautiful young woman who had just turned 17 that June. She was preparing for her senior year at Nelson County High School, where she served as co-captain of the volleyball team, the Nelson Lady Govs. Her friends and family described her as someone who lived in celebration, obsessed with social media, sports, fashion, and especially the color pink. She had recently received a raise at her job at Kid to Kid in Charlottesville and was looking forward to her senior year and graduation. Alexis was never without her iPhone 4, which had become like an extension of herself, and she was particularly excited about getting her senior photos taken, which explained her trip to Lynchburg that Saturday evening. Her mother, Laura Murphy, later described that final day with tears in her eyes during court testimony. "That was the last day I saw my daughter," she said, wearing a pink ribbon in honor of Alexis's favorite color. The family had no reason to worry that evening. Alexis was a responsible teenager who always stayed in touch, always called, and always came home when she said she would. When her grandmother woke up at 1:20 a.m. and saw that the light she had left on for Alexis was still burning, she knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The Murphy family alerted the Nelson County Sheriff's Office the next morning, explaining that this disappearance was completely out of character for their daughter. Within hours, a massive search effort began involving helicopters, search teams with canine units, and assistance from Nelson County Sheriff's Office, Virginia State Police, and the FBI. Alexis's school friends rallied to help create media attention, and within just 48 hours, her disappearance had gained national attention. Her aunt, Angela Taylor, described Alexis as a girly girl who had been actively looking at colleges and was excited about everything ahead of her. "For this to occur is just completely out of character for her," she told reporters. On August 6, 3 days after Alexis disappeared, her white 2003 Nissan Maxima was found abandoned in the parking lot of the Carmike Theater in Albemarle County. Surveillance footage showed the car arriving there around 10 p.m. on August 4, though the driver was not visible in the video. The discovery of her abandoned vehicle only deepened the family's fears and intensified the search efforts. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the Liberty gas station in Lovingston, where Alexis had been seen on the evening of August 3. The video showed a man holding the door for Alexis as she entered the store, and later footage revealed her white Nissan following his camouflage suburban north on US Route 29, away from her intended destination of Lynchburg. The man was identified as 48-year-old Randy Allen Taylor, who lived in a camper on property near Lovingston. Employees at the Liberty gas station knew Taylor well, describing him as a regular customer who would buy Pall Mall red cigarettes and beer. More disturbing was their testimony about his behavior around teenage girls. Assistant manager Tammy Hitt testified that Taylor would gawk at the teenage girls who came into the station after school. Melissa Jarrell, who was working on August 3, said Taylor would sit there for hours watching everybody and described him as the last person you'd want to be alone with. Jarrell witnessed the interaction between Taylor and Alexis in the parking lot, testifying that she saw Alexis turn her head as if someone spoke to her. Then she walked over to his car and they talked. When investigators first questioned Taylor, he repeatedly denied ever seeing Murphy, being at the Liberty gas station that evening, or leaving his residence on August 4. But as evidence mounted against him, his story began to change dramatically. When confronted with proof that contradicted his denials, Taylor first claimed he had been buying marijuana that night from an unnamed friend who later drove him to Charlottesville. It wasn't until investigators presented him with DNA evidence proving that Alexis had been in his camper that Taylor finally admitted she had been there. FBI investigators Billy Mays and Janet Pittman spent 7 hours interviewing Taylor on August 11, 2013. During these recorded interviews, the investigators urged Taylor to think of his own son, who was 3 years younger than Alexis. "If this were your son, you'd want that person to tell," May said to Taylor during the interrogation. At that point, they revealed they had evidence that Alexis's phone had been on his property and that they had found one of her hairs proving she had been in his camper. Faced with this evidence, Taylor dramatically changed his story once again. He now claimed that Alexis had come to his camper with a black man with cornrows who was driving a maroon Chevrolet Caprice. According to Taylor's new version, this mysterious man had sold him marijuana, and all three had spent time in the camper before Alexis and the man left together. "We smoked a little weed," Taylor said on the recording. "I got some beer." The investigators expressed skepticism about Taylor's story, questioning why a drug dealer would come to the residence of someone he didn't know, and why Taylor, who had a surveillance camera on his camper, would leave Alexis and this stranger alone while he went to get beer. Despite Taylor's usual claims that he wasn't good with time, he was very specific about this detail, saying they were here for over an hour. Taylor was arrested that day after the 7-hour interview. Following his arrest, FBI investigators conducted a second search of his camper and discovered the Miller Lite t-shirt he had been wearing in the gas station surveillance video, balled up under the sofa. The shirt would later prove to contain crucial evidence linking him to Alexis's disappearance. The investigation revealed increasingly troubling details about what had happened to Alexis. FBI searches of Taylor's camper uncovered a strand of Alexis's hair, a damaged fingernail, and a diamond earring stud, all of which were matched to her through DNA analysis. Perhaps most unsettling was the discovery of Alexis's DNA on Taylor's t-shirt, along with one of her hair extensions and a false eyelash. Special Agent Brittany Wampler, who participated in the search of Taylor's camper, later testified about the uncomfortable feelings she and other female FBI agents experienced during their interactions with Taylor. She described his very intense stare that made the agents uncomfortable, providing insight into the predatory behavior that gas station employees had also witnessed. Wampler also observed matted grass behind an abandoned house on the property where Taylor lived, with tire marks that looked like a vehicle low to the ground, unlike Taylor's larger SUV. Investigators later found grass and mud under Alexis's Nissan Maxima, suggesting it had been in that location. The most heartbreaking discovery was Alexis's iPhone, which was found by a canine officer in dense undergrowth about 70 feet from Taylor's camper. The phone had suffered extensive damage. The back was smashed off, the battery was missing, the battery cables were pulled out, and the processor was cracked, making it impossible to retrieve any information. FBI electronic engineer Dustin Simley testified that the last activity on the phone occurred at 7:36 p.m. on August 3, and then the phone went silent. When the damaged phone was shown to the jury, it was a moment that Alexis's Aunt Trina Murphy would later describe as emotional and disturbing. "It was something Alexis kept with her all the time," she said. "It clearly speaks to the fact she never left there. She never would have left without that phone." Additional evidence emerged about Taylor's movements after Alexis disappeared. Surveillance video from an armed forces recruiting station showed Alexis's Nissan arriving at the Carmack Theatre parking lot around 10 p.m. on August 4. Approximately 30 minutes later, Taylor appeared at a nearby Applebee's restaurant where bartender Jerry Madison Jr. testified that a sweating Taylor ordered 2 Heineken beers and requested a cab. Taylor told the bartender that his buddy was passed out outside, though Madison never saw anyone with him. Cab driver John Statt confirmed that he drove Taylor to Woods Mill, about 3 miles north of Taylor's camper, but also saw no companion. Earlier that same day, video evidence showed Taylor at an adult bookstore called Ultimate Bliss on Angus Road in Charlottesville at 5:21 p.m. on August 3, where he purchased 2 explicit videos. This timeline placed him in the area hours before his encounter with Alexis at the gas station. The man Taylor claimed had been with Alexis was identified as Damon Malcolm Bradley. When Bradley was located and questioned, he provided a completely different account. Bradley testified that he had moved to Birmingham, Alabama, shortly after Alexis disappeared, and was surprised when police contacted him because he didn't know her well, although he was dating her cousin. He explained that he had graduated in 2007, 7 years before Alexis would have graduated, and said their only connection was through Facebook. Most importantly, Bradley provided a solid alibi. He had spent the weekend of Alexis's disappearance in a motel in Madison Heights with his girlfriend, and the couple had no car that weekend. He categorically denied ever being in Taylor's camper or selling him marijuana. Randy Allen Taylor's trial began on May 1, 2014, in Nelson County Circuit, court under Judge Michael Gamble. The selection of the jury took about 8 hours, and Judge Gamble issued a gag order to prevent law enforcement officials, lawyers, and their employees from speaking publicly about the case. Taylor pleaded not guilty to all charges, maintaining his story about the mysterious third person. The prosecution was led by Commonwealth's attorney Anthony Martin, who faced the challenging task of proving murder without a body. In his 40-minute opening statement, Martin methodically laid out the physical evidence found in Taylor's camper. Alexis's DNA, her damaged nail, and hair with roots attached. He also connected Taylor to Alexis's abandoned car and detailed the timeline of events that night. Martin was attempting something extremely rare in Virginia criminal law, securing a murder conviction without the victim's body. Legal expert David Heilberg noted that such cases are few and far between, with the last similar local case being the 1983 conviction of Glenn Haslam Barker for the 1982 death of 12-year-old Katie Worski. Defense attorney Michael Hallahan argued that there was insufficient evidence for a conviction, telling the jury, "There's way too much reasonable doubt." Throughout the trial, Hallahan maintained that law enforcement had not fully investigated Taylor's claims about the third person and had focused predominantly on his client despite the alleged accomplice leaving the state shortly after Alexis disappeared. Hallahan also questioned how the T-shirt with Alexis's DNA had appeared in the camper after it had been thoroughly searched by the FBI, suggesting it had been planted. "What I submit is that Wednesday the shirt and hair weren't there," Hallahan argued. The trial featured emotional testimony from Alexis's family members. Her mother, Laura Murphy, took the stand wearing a pink ribbon and broke down several times while describing her daughter. She told the court about Alexis's excitement about her senior year, her job, and her plans for the future. Alexis's grandmother, Gail Taylor, testified about her granddaughter's excitement about buying hair extensions and her habit of always calling when she was on her way home. The prosecution called approximately 50 witnesses over 6 days of testimony. These included the gas station employees who described Taylor's predatory behavior, FBI agents who detailed the evidence found in his camper, and the bartender and cab driver who testified about Taylor's suspicious behavior after Alexis's disappearance. Cell phone expert Wendell Kosinzer explained the technical evidence showing that Alexis's phone had been in the vicinity of Taylor's camper before going silent. In his closing argument on May 7, 2014, Commonwealth's attorney Martin addressed the central question of the case. The biggest problem in Taylor's story, and it is a story, is that she left alone and was fine, Martin told the jury. Is it reasonable to leave without her hair extension, her nail, her DNA and cell phone? In a dramatic moment, Martin grabbed the stack of evidence envelopes containing Alexis's hair, damaged nail, diamond stud, broken cell phone, and Taylor's T-shirt. "This stuff doesn't lie," he declared. "DNA doesn't lie." He then silently opened one of the evidence bags, put on gloves, and held up Taylor's T-shirt and Alexis's hair extension before asking the jury, "No abduction, no murder." Defense attorney Hallahan made one final attempt to create reasonable doubt, even suggesting an alternative theory. What if someone paid him $10,000 to abduct and sell her overseas? He stressed that there was no definitive proof that Alexis was dead, and reminded the jury that they needed to be certain beyond a reasonable doubt. "You may not like him, but that's not enough to convict him," Hallahan told the jurors. On May 8, 2014, after deliberating for 6 hours, the jury returned with their verdict. The grim-looking jurors, who avoided making eye contact with Taylor, found him guilty on both charges. First-degree murder in the commission of an abduction and abduction with intent to defile. Some jurors were seen crying, as the verdict was read around 4 p.m. that Thursday afternoon. This conviction marked only the third successful prosecution of murder without a body in Virginia state history. Immediately following the guilty verdict, the sentencing phase began. At this point, Taylor's attorney requested that his client be excused from the courtroom, and before the judge could respond, Taylor quickly rushed toward the exit door before being surrounded by deputies. He would not be present to hear the impact his actions had on Alexis's family. Laura Murphy took the stand during the sentencing phase, her voice breaking as she addressed the court. "It has been a living nightmare for us," she testified. "If Taylor were in my shoes, how would he feel?" She spoke about how her daughter had missed her most important year, her senior year in high school, and would not receive her diploma on May 17, just 9 days away. Laura broke down in sobs as she described the enormous hole Alexis's absence had left in their family. The jury took less than 30 minutes to recommend life sentences on both counts. Virginia had abolished parole in 1996, and the jury made it clear they never wanted Taylor to be released. The formal sentencing was scheduled for July 23, 2014. During the sentencing hearing in July, Taylor made one final attempt to negotiate. He claimed that a third person had been involved and offered to reveal the location of Alexis's remains in exchange for a reduced sentence of 20 years. However, both the prosecution and Alexis's family rejected this proposal. The family stated they were not willing to negotiate with someone who took the life of their daughter. On July 23, 2014, Taylor was formally sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse after the verdict, the emotions of Alexis's family were evident. Trina Murphy, Alexis's great-aunt and family spokesperson, described hearing the verdict as like winning the lottery and justice being served. However, she also acknowledged the bittersweet nature of the moment. "It doesn't bring us the closure that we need, but it goes a long way in helping us." When asked if they believed Taylor would ever confess to what he did with Alexis, family members said they prayed he would, but seriously doubted it would happen. Commonwealth's attorney Anthony Martin held a brief press conference after the sentencing, stating that the jury had put a dangerous man in jail. The conviction was particularly significant because Taylor had also been linked to the 2010 disappearance of 19-year-old Samantha Ann Clark in Orange County, Virginia. The night Clark was last seen, Taylor had contacted her by phone at least 5 times, and investigators were so convinced of his involvement that they had placed a GPS tracker on his car. Clark's body has never been found. For more than 7 years, Alexis Murphy's family lived without knowing where she was. Her aunt Angela Taylor described the ongoing pain of not having closure, of not being able to properly lay their loved one to rest. The family held vigils, continued to speak publicly about Alexis's case, and never gave up hope that they would someday find answers. That hope was finally fulfilled on December 3, 2020, when Alexis's remains were located on private property in Lovingston. Angela Taylor received the call from her sister that changed everything. They found Alexis. The discovery was so overwhelming that Angela had to pull over on Interstate 64 because she became physically ill. The remains were transporting to the Central District Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Richmond and were positively identified as Alexis Murphy on February 5, 2021. The family chose to keep this information private for 3 months before announcing it publicly on February 17, 2021, to give themselves time to grieve and make proper arrangements. Reports later indicated that Randy Taylor himself had led investigators to Alexis's remains, though he received no sentencing concessions for this assistance. After 7.5 years of maintaining his innocence and refusing to provide information about where Alexis could be found, Taylor finally guided authorities to her location. On June 5, 2021, what would have been Alexis's 25th birthday, her family held a celebration of life. Angela Taylor described it as a celebration of life and her, and to say thank you to law enforcement. Representatives from local police, state police, and the FBI all attended. To me, it was the perfect way to bring closure to this long, traumatic situation that so many in Nelson and across the country watched for 7 years, Angela said. 10 years after Alexis's disappearance, her family gathered again at the Liberty gas station in Lovingston for a vigil on the anniversary of that tragic night. Laura Murphy, still grieving but finding strength in community support, reflected on the bittersweet nature of their journey. "I'm feeling sad and happy at the same time," she said. "Sad because we don't have her, but happy that 10 years, that we have all these people to still come out and remember her." She described how finding Alexis's remains had lifted a dark cloud, but couldn't clear the sky entirely. "I have peace, but it's not a day that don't go by that I don't think of her. I'm at peace, but still not at peace." Through their unimaginable loss, the Murphy family found the strength to help others. They partnered with Help Save the Next Girl, founded by Gil Harrington, whose daughter Morgan had also been taken from her family. Gil Harrington sat with the Murphy family throughout Taylor's trial